On my son's wedding day, 500 guests watched my in-laws point a finger at me and laugh. They called me a burden. They called me human trash. They thought I was just a broke old man in a cheap suit who was lucky to be breathing the same air as them. My daughter-in-law stood there in her $50,000 dress and laughed the hardest. She thought she had won the lottery by marrying my son. But when I stood up and walked out, I wasn't walking away in shame. I was walking away to make a phone call that would bankrupt their entire family by sunrise. My name is Langston Bennett. I am 71 years old. And this is how I taught my son that the man cleaning the floor often owns the building. If you have ever been underestimated because of how you look or where you come from, like this video and subscribe. Let me know in the comments which city you are watching from. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom were blinding. They were designed to intimidate, and everything about this wedding was calculated to make people feel small. I sat at table 42. It was the table furthest from the stage, tucked behind a massive pillar and right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter walked out with a tray of filet mignon, I got a face full of steam and noise. It was the table for the help. I looked down at my hands. They were rough, calloused hands. Hands that had laid asphalt-fixed engines and loaded cargo ships for 50 years. Today, they rested on a polyester tablecloth that probably cost more than the suit I was wearing. My suit was charcoal gray, bought off the rack at a discount store 5 years ago. It was a little tight in the shoulders, and the fabric shined under the lights in a way that screamed cheap. I tugged at my collar. It felt like a noose. Across the room, the Sterling family held court at the head table. They looked like royalty. Richard Sterling, the father of the bride, wore a custom Italian tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He held a glass of champagne as if it were a scepter. His wife Catherine dripped in diamonds that caught the light with every fake laugh she let out. They were beautiful, they were polished, and they were rotten to the core. I watched my son Darius sitting next to his bride Victoria. He looked terrified. Darius is 32 years old, a brilliant architect, with a heart too big for this city. He looked at Victoria with eyes full of adoration, but she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the photographer, making sure her good side was captured. She was looking at her guests, ensuring they envied her. She was a statue of ice and silk. I had tried to warn Darius. I tried to tell him that people who judge you by your shoes will never watch your back in a fight. But he was in love. He told me I was bitter. He told me the Sterlings were just different. He was right. They were different. They were predators. The music died down. The chatter stopped. A spotlight hit the center of the room. Richard Sterling tapped his microphone. The sound echoed through the hall, silencing 500 of the city's elite. He flashed a smile that showed too many teeth. "Welcome, everyone." Richard boomed, his voice smooth as oil. "Today we celebrate the union of my beautiful daughter Victoria and her lucky groom Darius." There was polite applause. Richard raised a hand to silence it. He wasn't done. He turned his gaze toward Darius and his smile grew tighter. "We all know Darius comes from humble beginnings, very humble. When he came to us, he was a rough stone. But the Sterling family knows how to polish a rough stone. We gave him connections. We gave him opportunities. We welcomed him into a world he could only dream of." I felt the air in the room shift. It wasn't a toast. It was a declaration of ownership. Richard was marking his territory. Darius shifted in his seat, his smile faltering. But Richard was just getting started. He stepped off the stage and began walking through the tables. The spotlight followed him. He walked past the bankers, the lawyers, the politicians. He walked all the way to the back, to the kitchen doors, to table 42. The light blinded me for a second. Richard stopped right in front of my table. He looked down at me with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You see, folks, we have to give Darius credit," Richard said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "It is not easy to climb the ladder of success when you have a heavy anchor tied to your ankle." He pointed a manicured finger at me. "This is Langston, Darius's father. Look at him." 500 heads turned. 500 pairs of eyes judged my cheap suit, my rough hands, my old shoes. I sat perfectly still. My face was a mask of stone. I had faced union busters, corrupt cops, and hurricanes on the open sea. A man in a tuxedo didn't scare me. But it hurt. It hurt because of Darius. Richard chuckled. "Darius has worked so hard to wash off the stench of poverty, but you can't get rid of it completely, can you, son? Not when you have to drag this around. That is not a father. That is a cautionary tale. That is the trash you leave behind when you move up in the world." The room went silent. Deadly silent. It was the kind of silence where you could hear a heartbreak. I looked at the stage. I looked at Victoria. This was the woman who promised to love my son. This was the woman who was supposed to unite our families. Victoria threw her head back and laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a loud, ringing laugh of genuine amusement. She covered her mouth with her hand, her diamond ring sparkling, but her eyes were dancing. She found it funny. Her father calling me trash was the highlight of her night. That laugh was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. I looked at Darius. He had turned pale. He looked at his wife. He looked at her laughing face. Then he looked at her father standing over me, gloating like a hunter with a trophy kill. And then he looked at me. For 32 years I taught my son to be gentle. I taught him to be kind. I taught him that violence is the tool of the weak. But I also taught him that dignity is not negotiable. Darius stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound cut through Victoria's laughter. She stopped. She looked at him confused. "Sit down, Darius," she hissed. "My dad is just joking. Don't be so sensitive." Darius ignored her. He walked to the center of the stage. He took the microphone from the stand. His hand was trembling, but his eyes were dry. He looked out at the sea of faces. He looked at Richard, who was still standing next to me, smirking. "You called my father trash," Darius said. His voice echoed through the speakers. It wasn't loud, but it was heavy. Richard shrugged. "I call it like I see it, son." "I am just saying you should be grateful we overlook his existence." Darius looked down at the ring on his finger, the platinum band I had paid for by selling my vintage truck because the Sterlings insisted on a specific jeweler. He pulled it off. "My father worked 18 hours a day to put me through college," Darius said. "He wore the same boots for 10 years so I could have new sneakers for school. He ate leftovers so I could have fresh meat. You call him trash. I call him the only man in this room worth a damn." He turned to Victoria. She looked annoyed now, not scared, just annoyed that her party was being interrupted. "Darius, stop it," she snapped. "You are embarrassing me. Sit down." Darius looked at her, and for the first time in 3 years the fog of love lifted from his eyes. He saw the predator beneath the silk. "There is no wedding," he said. The gasp from the crowd sucked the air out of the room. "What did you say?" Victoria shrieked. "I said it is over," Darius said. He threw the ring. It hit the floor with a tiny metallic ding that sounded like a gunshot. "I am not marrying into a family that mocks the man who made me who I am. We are done." Chaos erupted. Catherine Sterling stood up and screamed, "You ungrateful little rat! You will pay for this!" Richard turned red. His veins bulged in his neck. He lunged toward me, grabbing my lapel. "You tell your son to fix this right now." "Old man," he spat, "do you know how much this night cost? You fix this, or I will bury you both." I didn't blink. I slowly reached up and removed his hand from my suit. My grip was iron. I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He realized too late that the muscles under my cheap jacket were not from age but from a lifetime of hauling steel. "Don't touch me," I said. My voice was low, a rumble of thunder before the storm. "And don't worry about the cost. You have bigger debts to worry about." I stood up. I straightened my jacket. I turned my back on him. I walked toward the stage where Darius stood alone, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. The guests parted like the Red Sea. Nobody wanted to be near the disaster. I climbed the steps. I put my arm around my son's shoulders. He collapsed into me, burying his face in my chest, just like he did when he was 5 years old and scraped his knee. "Let's go, son," I said. We walked out. We walked past the screaming bride. We walked past the cursing father. We walked past the whispering crowd. We walked out the double doors of the Grand Plaza Hotel and into the cool night air. The valet brought my truck around. It was a 20-year-old Ford faded blue with rust on the wheel wells. It rattled when it idled. It was the only vehicle I let the Sterlings see. I opened the passenger door for Darius. He climbed in tears streaming down his face, ruining his expensive tuxedo. He looked broken. He looked like a man who had lost his entire world in the span of 10 minutes. I walked around to the driver's side. I climbed in and started the engine. The old truck roared to life. As we pulled away from the curb, leaving the lights and the noise behind us, Darius finally spoke. "Dad, I ruined everything," he sobbed. "I lost her. I lost my job. They are going to ruin me. I have nothing left. I reached into the glove compartment. I pulled out a secure satellite phone. It was black heavy and definitely not something a poor retired mechanic would own. I handed him a handkerchief. "Dry your eyes, son," I said. My voice changed. The rasp of the old man disappeared, replaced by the sharp authority of the CEO who commanded a fleet of 3,000 cargo ships. "You didn't lose anything tonight, Darius. You just woke up." I dialed a number on the secure phone. "Thorne," I said when the line connected. "Execute Protocol 0, buy the debt, all of it. The Sterlings don't own that hotel anymore, and freeze Richard's credit lines. I want his cards declined before he orders another bottle of champagne." Darius stopped crying. He stared at me at the phone at the cold look in my eyes. "Dad," he whispered. "What are you doing? Who is Thorne?" I merged onto the highway, heading away from my small rented house and toward the private airfield where my jet was waiting. "I am not just a father," Darius said. "I am the bank, and tonight the Sterlings just made a withdrawal they can't afford to pay back." The sun had not even fully risen when the pounding started on my front door. It was not a knock, it was an assault. My house sits on the edge of town, where the paved road turns into gravel and dust. It is a small wooden structure with peeling white paint and a porch that leans slightly to the left. To the outside world, it looks like a place where a poor retired mechanic waits to die. To Richard and Catherine Sterling, it was nothing more than a kennel they had to visit to kick the dog. I opened the door. The morning air was cold, but the heat coming off the Sterlings was scorching. They pushed past me without waiting for an invitation. A wave of expensive perfume and stale alcohol filled my small living room. Richard looked like a man on the edge of a stroke. His custom tuxedo from the night before was rumpled and his eyes were bloodshot. Catherine was still wearing her diamonds, but they looked sharp and cold in the morning light, and Victoria stood behind them. Her eyes were swollen, but her face was twisted into a sneer of pure hatred. "This place smells like old grease," Catherine said, wrinkling her nose. She looked at my worn armchair and the small television set from the 90s. I closed the door slowly. I did not offer them a seat. "What do you want, Richard?" I asked. My voice was calm. It was the calm of a captain who knows the storm is coming but also knows his ship is made of steel. Richard did not speak. He paced around my small living room like a caged tiger. He kicked a stack of old newspapers. He looked at the photos on the mantel. Photos of Darius and me on fishing trips. Photos of my late wife. He picked one up and threw it face down on the table. "We are not here for pleasantries," Langston Catherine snapped. "Get me some coffee, now, and water." I looked at Darius, who had spent the night on my sofa. He was curled up in a ball, still wearing his tuxedo trousers and an undershirt. He looked up at them with fear in his eyes. He was a grown man, an architect who built skyscrapers, but in front of these people, he was a child again. I went to the kitchen. I poured black coffee into a chipped mug. I filled a glass with tap water. I walked back into the living room. I handed the coffee to Catherine. She took it. She looked at the steam rising from the cheap instant blend. "You are too slow, old man," she hissed. She flicked her wrist. The hot coffee splashed across my chest. It soaked into my flannel shirt. It burned my skin. The dark liquid dripped onto my linoleum floor. I did not flinch. I did not yell. I just stood there. I felt the heat on my skin, but it was nothing compared to the fire burning in my gut. A woman who I knew for a fact was 3 months behind on her country club dues had just thrown coffee on a man who could buy the coffee plantation. "Oops," she said, her voice flat. No apology, just a challenge. I took the mug from her hand and set it on the table. I wiped my shirt with a rag I kept in my pocket. "State your business," I said. Richard stopped pacing. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He threw it at me. It hit my chest and fell to the floor. "Pick it up," he commanded. I bent down. My knees cracked. I played the part of the old man perfectly. I picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was an itemized bill. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the band, the security, the emotional distress. The total at the bottom was circled in red ink, $250,000. "You owe us this," Richard said. "You and your son ruined the most important night of our lives. You humiliated us in front of the governor, in front of our investors. You broke a contract." I looked at the number, It was a lot of money for a mechanic. It was pocket change for me, but that wasn't the point. "We are suing you," Victoria spoke for the first time. Her voice was ice. "Breach of promise. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Fraud. By the time we are done, you will be living in a cardboard box under the highway." I looked at Darius. He was shaking. He stood up slowly. "Victoria, please," he begged. "I don't have that kind of money. You know I don't." Richard laughed. It was a bark of a laugh. "We know you don't have it, boy," he said. "We know exactly what you have. We know you took out a high-interest loan just to pay for the engagement ring. We know you are maxed out on 3 credit cards trying to keep up with my daughter's lifestyle." I turned to my son. Darius looked at the floor. "Is that true, son?" I asked softly. Darius nodded. Tears streamed down his face. "I wanted to make her happy, Dad," he whispered. "They said I had to prove I could provide. I borrowed $50,000 from a lender. The interest is 40%. I thought once we were married I would get the promotion and I could pay it back." I closed my eyes. My son. My brilliant, kind son. They had bled him dry before the wedding even started. They had turned him into a debtor just to feel worthy of their love. "You are pathetic," Catherine said. She looked at me. "And you are responsible. You raised a failure. You will pay this bill, or we will take this shack. We will take his car. We will garnish every paycheck he earns for the rest of his miserable life." Richard stepped close to me. He was tall, but I was broader. He poked a finger into my chest right where the coffee stain was drying. "You have 24 hours, he said. "Find the money. Sell a kidney. I don't care. If I don't have a certified check by tomorrow noon, I am filing the lawsuit. And I will make sure Darius never works as an architect in this city again. I know people. I will bury him." He turned and walked to the door. Catherine followed him. Victoria stopped. She looked at Darius one last time. "You were never good enough," she said. "I was doing you a favor." She slammed the door behind her. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the silence of a tomb. Darius collapsed onto the sofa. He put his head in his hands and sobbed. It was a guttural sound, the sound of a man who has lost his dignity, his love, and his future all at once. "I am sorry, Dad," he choked out. "I am so sorry. I lost everything. They are going to take your house. They are going to destroy us." I walked over to the window. I watched the Sterlings get into their rented limousine. I watched them drive away, kicking up dust on my gravel road. They thought they had won. They thought they had crushed a bug. They had no idea they had just walked into the lion's den and pulled its tail. "Get up, Darius," I said. He didn't move. "Dad, just leave me alone. I need to think. Maybe I can beg them. Maybe I can work out a payment plan." I walked over to him. I grabbed his shoulder. My grip was firm. I said, "Get up. We are not begging anyone, and we are not paying them a dime." Darius looked up. He saw something in my face he hadn't seen before. The mask of the tired old father was slipping. Underneath was the face of a man who negotiated million-dollar contracts for breakfast. "Follow me," I said. I walked to the kitchen. I moved the small circular table. I pulled back the worn rug that covered the linoleum. Underneath was a wooden floorboard that looked loose. Darius wiped his eyes. "Dad, what are you doing?" "We don't have time for home repairs." I ignored him. I pressed my thumb against a specific knot in the wood. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a digital keypad. Darius gasped. I typed in a 12-digit code. A green light flashed. There was a hiss of hydraulics. A section of the floor about 4 feet wide began to lower into the ground, revealing a steel staircase. "Come on," I said. I started down the stairs. Darius hesitated. He stood at the edge, looking down into the darkness. "Dad," he whispered. "What is down there?" The truth I called back. He followed me. As we descended, the air changed. The smell of stale coffee and old wood disappeared. It was replaced by the hum of electricity and the scent of conditioned air. We reached the bottom. I clapped my hands twice. Lights I commanded. The basement flooded with bright white light. This was not a cellar. It was a fortress. The walls were lined with soundproofing foam. In the center of the room sat a massive desk made of mahogany. Behind it was a wall of monitors, 12 screens in total, glowing with live data. Stock tickers scrolled across the top. Satellite feeds showed cargo ships moving across the Atlantic. Another screen showed real-time banking information. Darius stood at the bottom of the stairs, his mouth open. He looked around the room. He looked at the ergonomic leather chair. He looked at the secure server racks humming in the corner. He looked at the framed magazine cover on the wall. It was Forbes. The headline read, "The Ghost of Logistics: How Langston Bennett Built an Empire from the Shadows." He walked over to the magazine. He touched the glass. He looked at me. "Dad," he stammered, "that is you, but you fix cars. You grow tomatoes. You drive a truck that barely starts." I walked over to the desk. I sat down in the leather chair. It fit me much better than the cheap sofa upstairs. I typed a command on the keyboard. The center screen changed. It pulled up a detailed financial report on Richard Sterling. "I do fix cars," I said. "I like fixing cars. It keeps my hands busy. But that is my hobby, Darius." I pointed to the screens. "This is my job. I own Bennett Logistics. I own the shipping containers that bring Richard Sterling's cheap products into this country. I own the warehouse where he stores them. And as of 5 minutes ago, I own the debt on the limousine he just drove away in." Darius leaned against the wall as if his legs had given out. "You are rich," he whispered. I shook my head. "Richard Sterling is rich, son. He has money. He spends money. He flashes money." I leaned forward. My eyes locked onto his. "I am wealthy. There is a difference. Wealth is quiet. Wealth is power. And wealth is patient." I typed another command. A printer in the corner whirred to life. It spat out a single sheet of paper. I picked it up. It was a confirmation of a wire transfer. "I just bought your debt, Darius," I said. "The shark loan, the credit cards, all of it. You don't owe those banks anymore. You owe me. And I am forgiving the loan." Darius started to cry again, but this time they were tears of shock. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you hide this? Why did you let them treat you like that? Why did you let them treat me like that?" "Because I needed to know," I said. "I needed to know if you could stand on your own, and I needed to know who loved my son and who loved my wallet." I stood up and walked over to him. I placed my hands on his shoulders. "Now we know. Victoria didn't love you. She was an investment banker looking for a payout, and her parents are parasites." I turned back to the screens. I pulled up the live feed of the Sterling's bank accounts. I had access. I had access to everything. "They declared war on us, son," I said. "They fired the first shot. They threw water on me. They threatened you." I pressed a button. A red bar appeared on the screen next to Richard Sterling's name. "Now we return fire, but we don't use water. We use gravity. We are going to pull the ground out from under them so slowly they won't even realize they are falling until they hit the bottom." I looked at Darius. "Are you ready to stop being a victim?" Darius wiped his face. He straightened his back. He looked at the screens. He looked at the debt that was no longer hanging over his head. "Yes, Dad," he said. "Good. Pull up a chair. Let me show you how we bankrupt a millionaire before lunch." Darius was staring at the screens like a caveman looking at fire. He held the paper I gave him, but his hands were shaking too much to read it clearly. I picked up the secure line again. "Thorne," I said. "Status on the secondary liabilities." Thorne's voice was crisp on the speaker. "Acquired, sir. We bought the debt portfolio from the lender 3 minutes ago. You now own the $50,000 loan and the 3 maxed-out credit cards. Interest rate, 0%, sir. Good. Mark them as paid in full. Send the confirmation to my son's phone. Now." I hung up. It took exactly 12 seconds. Darius's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. He looked at the screen. He looked at me. His knees actually buckled and he had to grab the edge of the mahogany desk. "It is gone," he whispered. "The debt. It says 0 balance. Dad, how did you do that? Those banks. They were calling me 5 times a day." I leaned back in my leather chair. "I didn't call the bank, Darius. I bought the collection agency that held your paper. It was cheaper than paying the interest. You are free. You don't owe anyone a single cent except me. And I don't charge interest. I charge loyalty." Darius looked at the balance again. For 3 years he had been drowning. He had been working overtime, skipping meals, and selling his things just to keep Victoria in designer shoes. And with one phone call I had cut the anchor chain. But I could see the doubt in his eyes. He was happy, but he was scared. He didn't understand the scale of the war we were fighting. He thought this was magic. It wasn't magic, it was leverage. And we were about to need a lot more of it because the Sterlings were not going to take the humiliation lying down. The large monitor in the center of the wall blinked red. My AI sentiment tracker had picked up a spike in mentions of Darius's name. I maximized the window. It was a live stream. Victoria was sitting in her parents' sunroom. She looked perfect. Too perfect. Her makeup was done to look like she hadn't slept. She was wearing a simple white shirt, not the silk she usually wore. She was playing the victim card, and she was playing it like a virtuoso. "I am so scared, you guys," she whispered to the camera, tears welling up on command. Darius was always so controlling. I didn't want to say anything before because I loved him. But last night at the wedding, his father attacked my dad, and Darius threw the ring at me. I was terrified he was going to hit me. I am just glad I got out safe. Please pray for me and my family. The viewer count was climbing by the thousands. Comments were pouring in, calling my son a monster, calling for his head. Darius stared at the screen, his face draining of color. "She is lying," he yelled. "I never touched her. I bought her everything. I worked myself to death for her. Why is she doing this?" Before I could answer, his personal phone rang. It was his boss, Mr. Henderson. A man I knew played golf with Richard Sterling every Sunday. Darius answered it on speaker. "Mr. Henderson, I can explain." "Save it," Darius Henderson snapped. "I saw the video. We have a zero-tolerance policy for domestic abusers at this firm. You are fired effective immediately. Don't come in to clear your desk. We will mail your things. Security has been notified to bar you from the building." Click. The line went dead. Darius dropped the phone. He slumped into the chair, burying his face in his hands. "It is over, Dad," he sobbed. "My career, my reputation. She destroyed me. They took everything. I watched him crumble." It was painful to watch, but it was necessary. He needed to see them for what they were. They weren't just snobs. They were butchers. They didn't just want to win. They wanted to erase him. Darius reached for his phone. "I have to go live," he said, his voice frantic. "I have to tell my side. I have to deny it." I reached across the desk and snatched the phone from his hand. "No," I said. My voice was a whip crack in the quiet room. "You will do no such thing." Darius looked at me wild-eyed. "But Dad, they are ruining me. If I stay silent, I look guilty." I stood up and walked around the desk. I stood over him, blocking the view of the lying woman on the screen. "Listen to me, son. When your enemy is making a mistake, you do not interrupt them. When they are digging a hole, you do not take away their shovel. You hand them a bigger one." Victoria is overplaying her hand. She is emotional. She is desperate. She is making claims she cannot prove. If you argue now, it is just a messy breakup. If you wait until we have the facts, it is perjury. Darius shook his head. "But what facts?" "She is creating the facts." I walked back to my safe. I spun the dial. I pulled out a manila folder. It was thin. It contained only 3 pages. I tossed it onto the desk in front of him. "I have had a private investigator watching the Sterlings for 6 months," I said. "I didn't trust them. I didn't like how they treated you. Call it a father's intuition." Darius opened the folder. He looked at the first page. It was a medical report, a copy of an ultrasound from a private clinic in the city. His eyes went wide. "She is pregnant," he whispered. "She is... Oh my God. We are having a baby." A smile started to form on his lips, a stupid, hopeful smile. He was ready to forgive her. He was ready to run back to her because he thought he was going to be a father. I slammed my hand on the desk, shattering his moment. "Look at the date, Darius. Look at the date of conception." Darius looked down. He did the math. His face fell. He looked up at me, and the pain in his eyes was worse than when he lost his job. "That was the week I was in Chicago for the architecture conference," he said, his voice hollow. "I was gone for 10 days. I didn't touch her for a week before or after because she said she had a migraine." I nodded slowly. "That is right, son. The baby isn't yours. And judging by the timeline, it belongs to someone she sees very frequently, someone she pays." I pointed to the 3rd photo in the file. It was Victoria entering a gym with her personal trainer. His hand was on her lower back. It was intimate. Darius stared at the photo. The last piece of his heart finally hardened. He closed the folder. He didn't cry this time. He looked at the screen where Victoria was still crying fake tears for the camera. He looked at me. His eyes were cold, just like mine. "What do we do now?" he asked. I smiled. Now we let them think they won. 2 days later, the invitation arrived. It came via a courier in a black sedan, not the usual mail carrier. It was a thick cream envelope sealed with the Sterling family crest in red wax. Inside was a summons to dinner at Le Ciel, the only restaurant in the city with 3 Michelin stars and a waiting list that stretched into next year. The card read simply, "Let us make peace. 7 p.m. Darius held the card like it might explode. He looked at me with eyes that were still bruised from sleepless nights. "Dad, I'm not going," he said. "I can't look at them. I can't sit there and pretend they didn't try to ruin me. They still have the lawsuit hanging over my head." I took the card from his hand. The paper felt expensive. It felt like a trap. I knew exactly what this was. It was not a peace offering. It was an ambush. They wanted to get him alone. They wanted to intimidate him into signing something or admitting fault. They wanted to close the loop before the public humiliation destroyed their image completely. "You are going, son," I said. My voice was firm. "You are going to walk in there with your head high. You are going to listen to what they have to say, and you are going to let me drive you." Darius looked confused. "You are going to drive me. But your truck—" "We are not taking the truck," I interrupted. At 6:30, a black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the curb of my small rental house. It was sleek, silent, and cost more than the entire neighborhood combined. I stepped out of the driver's seat wearing a chauffeur's cap and a nondescript black suit. I opened the back door for my son. Darius stared at the car, then at me. He didn't ask where I got it. He was learning not to ask. He just got in. We arrived at Le Ciel at exactly 7 o'clock. The valet rushed to open the door, but I waved him away. I opened the door for Darius myself, playing the role of the dutiful servant. We walked toward the entrance. The Sterlings were already there, waiting in the lobby like monarchs holding court. Richard wore a suit that probably cost $5,000. Catherine was inspecting her manicure. Victoria was checking her reflection in a glass panel. When they saw Darius, Richard smiled. It was the smile of a shark that smells blood in the water. "Darius," he boomed, stepping forward to shake his hand. "I am glad you came to your senses. We need to put this ugly business behind us." He didn't look at me. To him, I was just part of the machinery, a driver, a servant, invisible. Darius pulled his hand away. "I am here to listen, Richard. That is all." Richard's smile tightened, but he nodded. "Fair enough. Let's eat." The maitre d' bowed and led them toward the private alcove in the back, the best seat in the house. I followed a few steps behind. As they reached the table, Richard turned around and blocked my path. He looked me up and down, his eyes filled with contempt. "This is a family discussion," he sneered. "Drivers and help wait over there." He pointed a finger toward the kitchen doors. There was a small wobbly table set up near the service station. It was dark, noisy, and humiliating. It was the penalty box for the unimportant. Darius stepped forward, his face flushing with anger. "He is not a driver, Richard. He is my father. He sits with us, or we leave." I placed a hand on Darius's shoulder. I squeezed it gently, a signal. "It is all right, sir," I said, my voice low and submissive. "I know my place. I will wait over here." Richard laughed. "See, Darius, even your father knows when he is outclassed. Go sit down, old man. Try not to embarrass us." I walked to the small table by the kitchen. I sat down. The chair was hard wood, not the velvet plush the Sterlings sat on. A waiter rushed past, bumping my shoulder with a tray of dirty dishes. He didn't apologize. I ordered a glass of tap water. From my vantage point, I could see the Sterling table perfectly. They looked like gods feasting on Olympus. They thought they had separated the herd. They thought they had isolated their prey. They had no idea I was the hunter. I took a sip of the lukewarm water and reached into my pocket. I pulled out my phone and a single wireless earbud. Before we left the house, I had slipped a military-grade listening device into the inner pocket of Darius's jacket. It was smaller than a button but powerful enough to pick up a whisper in a storm. I put the earbud in my left ear and tapped the screen. The audio feed initialized. The noise of the restaurant faded away, replaced by the crystal-clear voices of the Sterling family. So Darius Richard was saying, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "We have a proposal. We are willing to drop the lawsuit, all $200,000 of it. We will even forget the embarrassment you caused us at the wedding." I watched Darius through the gaps in the crowd. He was sitting stiffly, his hands clenched in his lap. "And what do I have to do?" he asked. Catherine chimed in, her voice dripping with fake maternal concern. Oh, honey, it is very simple. We just need you to sign a joint statement. A press release, really. It says that the wedding cancellation was a mutual decision based on private matters. It says that you were suffering from a mental breakdown due to work stress and that the Sterling family has been nothing but supportive. I gritted my teeth. They wanted him to take the fall. They wanted him to admit he was crazy so their stock prices wouldn't tank. And Victoria Darius asked, looking at his former fiancée, what about the lies she told, the accusations of abuse? Victoria sighed as if she were bored. I will delete the video, Darius. Once you sign the statement, I will post a clarification. I will say I was emotional, as people forget these things in a week. Richard leaned in. I heard the ice clink in his glass. Look, son, let me be frank with you. Sterling Corp is going through a sensitive merger. We need stability. Investors get spooked by drama. If this wedding fiasco drags on, if my reputation takes a hit, the merger fails. And if the merger fails, I lose a lot of money. I can't let that happen. Darius remained silent. Richard's voice grew harder, losing its veneer of politeness. You are a good kid, Darius. You really are. You are loyal. You work hard. You are a good dog. You bark when we tell you to bark, and you sit when we tell you to sit. We need you to sit right now. Sign the paper, take the blame. And maybe in a year or two, when the dust settles, we can find you a job in one of our satellite offices. Maybe in Ohio. A good dog. The words echoed in my ear. He didn't see my son as a human being. He saw him as a pet he could kick and then call back with a whistle. I looked at Darius. I could see the fight draining out of him. He was tired. He was scared. He just wanted it to end. I promise I will take care of you, Victoria whispered. Just be a good boy, Darius. Do this for us. I clenched my fist under the table. The water glass in my hand cracked under the pressure. A hairline fracture appeared in the crystal. They were dissecting him. They were stripping him of his honor, his truth, and his future just to save their quarterly earnings. They were monsters in silk and wool. I tapped the earbud. I had heard enough. I knew their play. They were desperate. Richard had admitted the merger was his lifeline. If the merger failed, he was dead in the water, and he needed Darius to be the scapegoat to keep the investors happy. It was time to send a message. Not a legal message. Not a financial message. A message that they were not the only ones with power in this room. I signaled the maitre d'. He saw me waving and frowned. He walked over slowly, clearly annoyed that the help was demanding attention. What is it? He asked, looking down his nose at me. The kitchen staff eats at 9. You will have to wait. I reached into the inner pocket of my chauffeur's jacket. I pulled out a card. It wasn't plastic. It was black anodized titanium. The Centurion card. The real one. Not the invite-only card for millionaires, but the one for people who own the banks. I placed it gently on the dirty tablecloth. The metal made a heavy thud that sounded louder than it should have. The maitre d' froze. He looked at the card. He looked at me. His face went pale. His entire demeanor changed instantly. His spine straightened, his sneer vanished, replaced by a look of terrified subservience. Monsieur, he stammered. I did not realize. I want to pay the bill, I said. My voice was calm, but it carried the weight of command. For the Sterling table, sir. Of course. I will bring the machine immediately. No, I said. Not for them. Not for... I swept my hand across the room, indicating the entire restaurant. The couples celebrating anniversaries, the business partners closing deals, the families enjoying a night out. I want to pay for everyone else, I said. Every single table in this restaurant, except for the Sterlings. The maitre d' blinked. Everyone, sir. That will be tens of thousands of dollars. I tapped the black card. Did I ask the price? No, sir. No, sir, of course not. Add a vintage bottle of Dom Perignon for every table, I continued. Tell them it is a gift from an anonymous friend. Let them toast to freedom. And the Sterling table, he asked, his voice trembling. Bring them their check, I said, and give Richard Sterling this. I took a linen napkin from the table. I pulled a silver fountain pen from my pocket. I wrote a single sentence on the fabric. The ink bled slightly into the white cloth, making the letters look jagged and cruel. I handed the napkin to the maitre d'. Deliver this with the bill, I said. After I leave. Yes, sir. Immediately, sir. I stood up. I adjusted my cap. I didn't look at Darius. I didn't look at Richard. I walked out of the restaurant through the main doors. I stood by the Rolls-Royce waiting. Through the large glass windows of the restaurant, I watched the scene unfold. Waiters began moving through the room like a synchronized army. Corks popped, champagne flowed, laughter erupted from every corner of the room as the maitre d' announced the anonymous gift. The atmosphere transformed from hushed dining to a raucous celebration. Everyone was smiling, everyone was cheering, except the Sterlings. They sat in their private alcove, isolated in a sea of joy. They looked confused. They looked around trying to understand why everyone else was celebrating while their waiter approached with a grim face. The waiter placed a black leather folder on the table in front of Richard. The bill. Richard opened it, expecting it to be taken care of. I saw his face twist in confusion. He argued with the waiter, pointing at the other tables. The waiter shook his head firmly. Then the waiter handed him the napkin. Richard took it. He unfolded the linen. He read the words I had written. Even from the street, I could see the color drain from his face. He went white as a sheet. He dropped the napkin as if it were burning his skin. He looked around the room, his eyes wide with a primal fear. He looked at the kitchen door where the old driver had been sitting. He looked at the empty chair. He realized then that there was a ghost in the room, a ghost with deep pockets and a long memory. He looked down at the napkin again, reading the words that would haunt him for the rest of his short career. The last meal is always the best. The week that followed the dinner at Le Ciel was a masterclass in cruelty. Richard Sterling did not just want to win. He wanted to salt the earth so nothing would ever grow again. Darius spent every waking hour applying for jobs. He was a top-tier architect. His portfolio was flawless. He had awards sitting on his shelf that most designers only dreamed of. But suddenly, none of that mattered. I sat in the kitchen drinking my cheap instant coffee, watching him make call after call. I watched the hope drain out of him drop by drop. He called the firm he had interned with. The managing partner hung up the moment he heard Darius's name. He called a boutique design studio in the city. They told him they were suddenly in a hiring freeze even though their website listed 3 open positions. Finally, he called his old mentor, Professor Alcott, a man who had once told Darius he was the brightest student he had ever taught. "Please, Professor," Darius begged into the phone. "I just need a reference. Just someone to say I am not a monster." I could hear the old man's voice on the other end. It was shaky and apologetic. "I can't, Darius. Richard Sterling sits on the board of the university. He threatened to pull funding for the new design wing if I associated with you. I am sorry, son. You have become radioactive." Darius ended the call. He stared at the phone for a long time. Then he stood up and walked to his room. I heard the sound of a zipper. I heard clothes being thrown into a bag. I walked to his door. He was packing. Not neatly. He was shoving his life into a duffel bag with the frantic energy of a man running from a fire. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Anywhere," Darius said without looking at me. "Idaho. Alaska. Somewhere the name Sterling doesn't mean anything. I can't stay here, Dad. I am dead here. I will go dig ditches. I will wait tables. I just need to get out." He zipped the bag. He looked at me and his eyes were red and hollow. "I am sorry I failed you, Dad. You built this secret empire and your son can't even get a job drawing bathroom renovations." He hoisted the bag onto his shoulder. He walked toward the front door. He had accepted defeat. He believed the lie that Richard Sterling was a god who controlled the sun and the moon. I blocked the doorway. "Put the bag down, son," I said. "Dad, please move." I said, "Put it down. You are not going to Alaska. You are going to work." Darius laughed. It was a dry, bitter sound. "Work where?" "Nobody will hire me." I checked my watch. It was 8 in the morning. "I will hire you," I said. "Grab your suit." "The good one. We have a meeting in 45 minutes. Darius looked at me confused. "Meeting? With who?" "You said you owned logistics. I am an architect, Dad. I don't know how to fix trucks." I opened the door and walked out to the black Rolls-Royce parked in the driveway. Who said anything about trucks? We drove into the city, but this time we didn't go to a restaurant. We drove to the financial district. We pulled up in front of the Millennium Tower, a 60-story glass monolith that dominated the skyline. It was the kind of building that made you feel small just looking at it. Darius looked out the window. "Why are we here, Dad? This is the financial center." I didn't answer. I pulled the car right up to the main entrance. A team of security guards in dark suits stepped forward. They didn't ask us to move. They opened the car doors. They bowed their heads. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," the head of security said. Darius stepped out onto the sidewalk. He looked at the guards. He looked at the building. Above the revolving doors in polished steel letters was the name Bennett Global Holdings. He froze. He looked at the sign. He looked at me. "Dad," he whispered. "That is our name." I handed the keys to the valet. "It is your name, son," I said. "I just kept it warm for you." We walked into the lobby. It was a cathedral of marble and glass. Hundreds of employees were rushing to the elevators. When they saw me, the sea of people parted. The chatter stopped. Nods of respect followed me as I walked toward the private elevator bank. Darius walked beside me looking like he had stepped onto another planet. He saw the logo on the wall. He saw the scale of the operation. He saw the power. We rode the elevator to the top floor. The doors opened into a reception area that looked more like a modern art gallery. My executive assistant, Sarah, was waiting. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," she said, handing me a tablet. "The board is waiting in conference room A, and Mr. Thorne is ready with the acquisition papers." I took the tablet. "Thank you, Sarah. This is my son, Darius. He will be taking over the corner office." Sarah smiled at Darius. "Welcome aboard, sir. We have heard a lot about you." Darius couldn't speak. He followed me down the long corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. We walked past offices where analysts were moving millions of dollars of cargo. We walked past a model of a new port terminal we were building in Singapore. I opened the double doors at the end of the hall. It was a massive office. The view was breathtaking. You could see the entire city. You could see the slums where we used to live. And you could see the glittering towers where the Sterlings played their games. I walked to the desk and sat on the edge. "I didn't build this just to make money, Darius," I said. "I built this so that no man could ever tell my son he wasn't good enough." Darius walked to the window. He touched the glass. He looked down at the city that had rejected him an hour ago. "You own the building," he said softly. "I own the block," I corrected. I pressed a button on the desk. "Thorne, come in." The side door opened. Thorne walked in. He was a man made of sharp angles and expensive fabric. He carried a leather portfolio. "Good morning, gentlemen," Thorne said. Darius turned around. "What is happening, Dad? Why am I here?" I motioned for Thorne to proceed. Thorne placed a large architectural blueprint on the table. Darius recognized it immediately. His eyes widened. "This is the Zenith project," he said. "The new city center development. It is the biggest contract in the state. Every firm is fighting for it." I nodded. "Indeed. And do you know who is currently the front runner to build it?" Darius frowned. "Sterling Development. Richard has been bragging about it for months. He says if he lands this contract, his company is set for the next decade." "That is correct," Thorne said. "Richard Sterling has leveraged everything he owns to bid on this. He has borrowed against his company, his home, and his future earnings to prove he has the capital to handle a project of this size." I stood up and walked over to the blueprints. "Richard needs this project to survive," I said. "He is overextended. If he doesn't get the Zenith contract, his loans get called in. He goes bankrupt within 90 days. Darius looked at the plans. He looked at me. He started to understand. "But who is the client?" Darius asked. "Who decides who gets the contract?" I tapped the table. "LB Holdings," I said. "A subsidiary of Bennett Global." Darius gasped. You are the client." "I am the client," I confirmed. "And as the client, I get to appoint the project director, the person who has absolute authority to approve or reject any bid, the person who decides if Richard Sterling lives or dies." I picked up a gold pen. I held it out to Darius. "I am appointing you, Darius. You are the new director of the Zenith project. Your name will be kept anonymous in the initial paperwork. Richard won't know who he is pitching to until the final presentation." Darius looked at the pen. He looked at the power I was offering him. It wasn't just a job, it was a sword. "And there is one more thing," Thorne added. He pulled out a financial dossier. "While Richard has been focusing on the bid, we have been busy in the secondary markets. We have begun acquiring Sterling Development's debt. Every time a vendor goes unpaid, every time a loan payment is late, we buy the note." I looked at my son. "By the time Richard walks into that presentation room to pitch his life's work to you, we will own 40% of his company's liabilities." Darius took the pen. His hand wasn't shaking anymore. He looked at the blueprints. He saw the flaws in Richard's design. He saw the arrogance in the proposal. He saw the path to victory. He looked at me. He called me trash. Darius said, his voice steady. I nodded. So let's take out the garbage, son. Darius uncapped the pen. He signed the contract. When do we start? He asked. Right now, I said. Thorne, get Richard Sterling on the phone. Tell him the new director wants to move the presentation up. Tell him we are eager to see what he has to offer. The rain was hammering against the tin roof of my small rental house. It was a miserable gray morning that matched the mood of the last few weeks perfectly. Darius was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing the architectural schematics for the Zenith project. He looked like a different man than the one who had wept in my truck. He was focused. He was driven. He was building an empire. But the ghosts of the past do not vanish just because you buy a new suit. The front door flew open without a knock. The wind blew rain into my living room, soaking the cheap rug. Victoria stood in the doorway. She looked like a drowned rat. Her designer coat was soaked and her mascara was running down her cheeks in black streaks. She wasn't wearing her usual mask of arrogance. Today she was wearing the mask of a martyr. Darius stood up so fast his chair fell over. Victoria, he said, his voice tight. What are you doing here? You are not welcome in this house. Victoria didn't answer him. She walked into the room and threw a crumpled piece of paper onto the table right on top of the $1 million blueprints. It was an ultrasound image, a grainy black and white photo of a tiny smudge of life. I am pregnant, she screamed, her voice cracked with a theatrical sob. I am carrying your child, Darius, and you and your father have left me destitute. Darius froze. He looked at the image. He looked at Victoria. His hands began to tremble. The architect vanished and the heartbroken lover returned. Pregnant, he whispered. But how? You said you were on the pill. I missed a few days because of the stress of the wedding planning, Victoria wailed. She grabbed his arm, digging her nails into his sleeve. And now look at us. My parents have lost everything because of your father's vindictiveness. We are going to lose our house. I have no money for a doctor. I have no money for prenatal vitamins. I am starving, Darius. She looked at me then. Her eyes were full of venom, but her voice was pleading. You won't let your grandchild starve, will you, Langston? I know you hate me. I know you think I am a monster. But this is an innocent baby. This is Darius's blood. I sat in my armchair in the corner watching the performance. It was impressive. She hit every note. The guilt, the shame, the fear. She knew Darius's weak spot. She knew he wanted to be a father more than anything in the world. What do you want, Victoria? Darius asked. His voice was soft. Too soft. I want $500,000, she said instantly. The tears stopped for a split second as she named the price. I want a lump sum. For medical expenses. For a safe home for the baby. If you give me the money, I will go away. I will raise the child quietly. I won't drag your name through the mud anymore. And if I don't, Darius asked. Victoria's face hardened. Then I will go to the press. I will tell them you abandoned your pregnant wife. I will tell them you and your father are financial terrorists who destroyed my family and left your own flesh and blood to die in the street. I will make sure you never work again. And when the baby is born, I will put it up for adoption. I will give it to strangers so you will never see it. Darius looked like he had been punched in the gut. He looked at the ultrasound. He looked at me. I could see the resolve crumbling in his eyes. I stood up slowly. I hunched my shoulders. I let my hands shake. I shuffled toward them, dragging my feet like the tired, broken old man she thought I was. Miss Victoria, please, I croaked. My voice was raspy and weak. We don't have that kind of money. Look at this place. I am just a mechanic. Darius is unemployed. We are eating beans from a can. I reached out and took her hand. It was cold and wet. She flinched as if I were a leper, but she didn't pull away. She wanted to savor my begging. Please don't give the baby away, I pleaded. I have a little savings. Maybe $5,000 in a coffee can. You can have it. Just don't hurt the child. Victoria laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. $5,000? That won't even buy my stroller, old man. You are pathetic. Both of you. She yanked her hand away. She reached into her purse and pulled out a silver hairbrush. She began aggressively brushing her wet, tangled hair, trying to regain her composure, trying to look like the queen she thought she was. She ripped through the knots, tossing her head. Find the money, Darius, she spat. You have connections. You have friends. Beg, borrow, or steal. I don't care. You have 48 hours. If I don't see $500,000 in my account, I am calling the news station." She threw the hairbrush onto the table in frustration. It clattered against the blueprints. She turned on her heel and marched out the door, leaving it wide open to the rain. I watched her go. I waited until I heard the engine of her car fade into the distance. Then I straightened my back. The shake in my hands disappeared. The hunch in my shoulders vanished. I walked over to the door and locked it. I turned to the table. Darius was staring at the ultrasound. He was reaching for his phone. "I have to pay her, Dad," he said, his voice frantic. "I can't let her give my baby away. I have access to the company accounts now. I can transfer the money. It is just a loan. I will pay it back." I walked to the table. I didn't look at the ultrasound. I picked up the silver hairbrush Victoria had left behind in her arrogance. It was full of long blonde strands. "Put the phone down, Darius," I commanded. He looked at me with wild eyes. "Dad, you don't understand. That is my child. That is my son or daughter. I can't play games with this." "It is not your child," I said. My voice was cold. It was the voice of the CEO. Darius slammed his fist on the table. "How do you know? You don't know that. You are just cynical. You hate her so much you are willing to sacrifice my happiness." I picked up a clear plastic evidence bag from my drawer. I carefully removed the hair from the brush and placed it inside the bag. I sealed it. "I hate her because she is a liar, Darius. I hate her because she is a thief. And I hate her because she thinks she can walk into my house and demand a ransom for a life she does not value." I held up the bag. "We are going to run a DNA test," I said. "I have your DNA on file from the insurance protocols at the company. I will have this sample at the lab within the hour. We will have results by tonight." Darius shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "What if you are wrong? What if it is mine? If we wait, if we antagonize her, she might hurt the baby. She might leave. Then we find her," I said. "We have the resources. We have the power. But we do not negotiate with terrorists, Darius. And that is what she is. She is holding an unborn child hostage for a paycheck." Darius looked at the ultrasound again. He traced the outline of the tiny shape with his finger. "I want to believe her, Dad," he whispered. "I want it to be true so badly. I want something good to come out of this mess." I walked over to him. I put a hand on his shoulder. This time I didn't hug him. I gripped him hard, forcing him to look at me. "Listen to me, son. You are the director of the Zenith Project. You control hundreds of millions of dollars. You are a king in this city. Kings do not act on hope. Kings act on intelligence." I took the ultrasound from the table. I held it up to the light. "Look at the date stamp," I said, pointing to the corner. She tried to smudge it, but it is there. That scan was taken 3 days ago. Based on the measurements, the fetus is 12 weeks along. Darius did the math. He counted back. His face went pale. 12 weeks, he said. I was in the hospital with you. You had your heart surgery. I slept in the waiting room for 5 nights. I didn't see her at all that week. I nodded. Exactly. She wasn't with you. She was comforting herself elsewhere. Darius slumped into the chair. The hope drained out of him, leaving only a hollow ache. "It isn't mine," he said. His voice broke. "It isn't mine." I put the ultrasound down. "No, son, it isn't." I picked up the evidence bag with the hair. "But we are going to prove it. And when we do, we are going to use it to nail her coffin shut." I walked to the secure phone on the wall. I dialed Thorne. "Thorne," I said, "I have a biological sample, priority 1 analysis." And Thorne put a surveillance team on Victoria Sterling. "I want to know everywhere she goes. I want to know who she meets. And I want to know the name of every man she has spoken to in the last 3 months." I hung up. I looked at Darius. "Do not call her," I ordered. "Do not text her. Do not send her a dime. If she calls, let it go to voicemail." Darius nodded slowly. He looked at the blueprints of the skyscraper he was going to build. He picked up his pen. His hand was steady again. "Yes, sir," he said. "Good. Get back to work. We have an empire to run, and we don't have time for fairy tales." The morning news cycle was a synchronized assault designed to bury my son. At 6 a.m, every local station interrupted their broadcast to show the footage. It was shaky cell phone video, but the subject was clear. Catherine Sterling was collapsing on the marble steps of the courthouse where she had gone to file the lawsuit against Darius. She clutched her chest. She gasped for air. Her face twisted into a mask of agony that was ready for an Academy Award. Richard was right there catching her before she hit the ground, screaming for help while looking directly into the camera lens. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen was a death sentence for Darius's reputation. Mother of jilted bride suffers massive stroke, blames stress from wedding trauma. I sat in my kitchen watching the television. Darius was pacing the floor, his hands pulling at his hair. He looked like a man who was about to break. "Dad, I did this," he said, his voice trembling. "I caused this. If she dies, it is my fault. The public is going to tear me apart." I looked at the screen. I looked at the comments rolling in on the social media feed. They were calling my son a murderer. They were calling him a monster who stressed an old woman into a grave. Reporters were already camped out on my lawn, pointing cameras at my windows, waiting for a glimpse of the villains. I stood up and walked to the television. I looked closely at the footage. I froze the frame right as Catherine fell. I zoomed in. I have spent 50 years reading people. I know what pain looks like. I know what a stroke looks like. I have seen men collapse on the docks from heat and exhaustion. When a body shuts down, it goes limp. It is heavy. It is ugly. Catherine did not go limp. As she fell, her right hand instinctively reached out to brace her fall so she wouldn't scuff her Chanel bag. A woman having a massive stroke does not worry about her purse. "She is lying," I said. My voice was calm, but the anger beneath it was hot enough to melt steel. Darius stopped pacing. "What do you mean?" "Look at her dad. She is in the ICU." I turned off the television. "She is in a private room at St. Jude's Medical Center," I corrected. "That is not a hospital, Darius. That is a country club with IV drips. It is where the rich go to hide their addictions and recover from facelifts." I walked to the secure phone on the wall. I dialed Thorne. "Thorne," I said, "who owns St. Jude's Medical Center?" There was the sound of typing on the other end. "It is owned by a private equity firm in Boston," Sir Thorne replied. "They are currently leveraging their assets for a buyout. They are cash poor." "Buy it," I said. There was a pause. "The whole hospital, sir. The whole thing," I said. "The building, the equipment, the doctors, and especially the security camera system. I want the deed in my hand in 1 hour." I hung up. I looked at Darius. "Get your coat, son. We are going to visit the sick." We did not take the truck. We took the Phantom. We drove through the back gate of my property to avoid the reporters. We arrived at St. Jude's 45 minutes later. It was a gleaming structure of glass and steel surrounded by manicured gardens. It looked expensive. It looked impenetrable. We walked into the main lobby. It was crowded with press. Richard Sterling had called a press conference. He was going to give an update on his wife's condition. He wanted to milk every ounce of sympathy from the city. I walked past the cameras. I walked past the security guards. I walked straight to the administrator's office. A man named Dr. Vance tried to stop us. He was a tall man with a fake tan and a suit that cost more than a nurse's yearly salary. He saw an old black man in a work jacket and assumed I was lost or the janitor. "You can't be back here," he snapped, stepping in front of me. "This is an administrative area. The service entrance is around the back." I didn't stop walking. I didn't even slow down. Thorne stepped out from behind me. He handed Dr. Vance a tablet. "Dr. Vance," Thorne said, his voice crisp. "My client, Mr. Bennett, has just acquired the controlling interest in this facility. You are no longer the administrator. You are currently trespassing." Vance looked at the tablet. He looked at the digital transfer confirmation. He looked at me. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Mr. Bennett," he stammered. I didn't know. We have a VIP patient. Mrs. Sterling, it is a very delicate situation." I snatched the master key card from his lapel. "I know the situation, Dr. Vance," I said, "and I am about to perform a miracle." I turned to Darius. "Come with me." We took the private elevator to the top floor, the VIP suite. The hallway was quiet. No reporters allowed up here. Only the best for Catherine Sterling. I walked to the nurse's station. The head nurse looked up. She recognized authority when she saw it. "Mrs. Sterling's chart," I demanded. She hesitated. "Sir, patient confidentiality is—" "I own the hospital." I interrupted. "Give me the chart." She handed it to me. I flipped it open. I read the notes. Admitted for observation. No evidence of stroke. No evidence of cardiac event. Patient requested privacy and champagne. I slammed the chart shut. Champagne. While my son was being crucified on national television, she was sipping bubbly. I looked at the security monitors behind the nurse's desk. Camera 4 showed the interior of the VIP suite. Catherine wasn't in bed. She wasn't hooked up to machines. She was standing in front of the mirror. She was fixing her hair. She was holding a glass of wine. And she was laughing. I pointed to the screen. "Can you patch this feed to the main display in the lobby?" I asked the nurse. She looked at the screen. She looked at the lie. She looked at me. She didn't like the Sterlings. Nobody liked the Sterlings. "Yes, sir," she said. "I can override the system." "Do it," I said. "Now." Down in the lobby, Richard Sterling stepped up to the podium. He looked devastated. He wiped a tear from his eye. The cameras flashed. The reporters leaned in. "My wife is fighting for her life," Richard sobbed into the microphone. "She is a delicate woman." The stress caused by Darius Bennett's cruel abandonment was too much for her heart. The doctors say it is touch and go. We are praying for a miracle. Behind him was a massive 20-foot digital screen. It was usually used to display donor names and soothing images of waterfalls. Suddenly the screen flickered. The waterfall disappeared. The image resolved. It was crystal clear. It was the live feed from room 402. Catherine Sterling was dancing. She was doing a little twirl in her hospital gown. She held the wine glass up to the light. She took a long drink. She picked up her phone and started typing, probably sending a text to Victoria about how brilliant their plan was. The lobby went silent. Dead silent. Richard didn't see it at first. He was too busy crying fake tears. "We just want justice," Richard wailed. "We want the man who did this to pay." A reporter in the front row coughed. He pointed a shaking finger over Richard's shoulder. "Mr. Sterling," the reporter said, "look behind you." Richard turned. He looked up. He saw his dying wife doing the cha-cha slide with a glass of Pinot Grigio. His face went white. His jaw dropped. The sobbing stopped instantly. The reporters started shouting. The cameras started flashing. But this time they weren't taking pictures of a grieving husband. They were taking pictures of a fraud. In the room above, Catherine heard the commotion. She looked at the camera in the corner of her room. She realized the little red light was on. She froze. The wine glass slipped from her hand. It shattered on the floor. I leaned into the microphone in the nurse's station, which was now patched into the lobby speakers. "This is Langston Bennett," I said, my voice booming through the entire hospital. "I am the new owner of this facility, and I am happy to report that Mrs. Sterling has made a miraculous recovery. She will be discharged immediately. And here is the bill." I signaled Thorne. He hit a button on his laptop. The screen in the lobby changed again. It showed the itemized bill for the VIP suite, the wine, the fake tests. Total cost $50,000. Richard Sterling stood on the stage, surrounded by the ruins of his lie. He looked for a way out. He looked for an excuse. But there was nowhere to hide. The cameras were rolling. The world was watching. And the poor old man he called trash had just pulled the curtain back on the whole show. Darius stood beside me watching the monitor. He wasn't crying anymore. He was smiling. It was a cold, hard smile. "Let's go down there, Dad," he said. "I want to see his face when he gets the bill." The Royal Pines Golf Club was a sanctuary for men who thought they ruled the world. It was acres of manicured green grass, high walls, and higher membership fees. It was the kind of place where business deals were signed over single malt scotch and the staff was trained to be invisible. I had bought the land 30 years ago when it was just a swamp. I leased it to the club for $1 a year under the condition that I remained the anonymous chairman of the board. I liked coming here on Tuesdays. I would wear my old polo shirt and walk the course checking the irrigation systems. I liked the smell of the grass. I was standing near the 18th hole examining a sprinkler head that had been misfiring when I heard a familiar voice. It was loud, abrasive, and desperate. Richard Sterling was walking toward the clubhouse with 3 men in expensive suits. I recognized them immediately. They were venture capitalists from New York. Richard was pitching them. He was trying to get an infusion of cash to save his company before the Zenith project bid collapsed. He was sweating. His laugh was too loud. He looked like a man running out of time. He saw me. He stopped mid-sentence. His face twisted in a mixture of shock and rage. He excused himself from his guests and stormed over to me. He didn't see the owner of the club. He saw the man who had humiliated him at the hospital. He saw a target. He bumped into me hard. It was deliberate. He used his shoulder to shove me off the cart path and onto the grass. "Watch where you are going, old man," he spat. I steadied myself. I looked at him. "Good afternoon, Richard." "Don't speak to me," he hissed. "What are you doing here? Did you follow me? Are you stalking me now?" He looked down at my hand. I was holding a vintage titanium driver. It was a prototype club given to me by Tiger Woods himself a decade ago. It looked old because I used it. Richard's eyes widened. That club. That is a titanium driver. That costs $2,000. He grabbed my wrist. You stole this, he shouted. He turned toward his guests and the other members on the patio. Hey everyone, look at this. We have a thief on the green. This man just stole a club from the pro shop. The patio went silent. The venture capitalist looked uncomfortable. Richard was making a scene, but he didn't care. He wanted to destroy me. He wanted to assert dominance in front of his potential partners. He wanted to show them he was a man who enforced the law. Security, he yelled, waving his arms. Get over here. We have a loiterer and a thief. Grab him before he runs. I didn't run. I didn't pull away. I just stood there holding the club, looking him in the eye. Let go of my arm, Richard, I said softly. He laughed. Or what? You will sue me with money you don't have. You are finished, Langston. I am going to have you arrested for trespassing and theft. You picked the wrong place to crash. 2 security guards came running from the clubhouse. They were young, fit men with earpieces. Behind them ran the general manager, Mr. Arthur Pendleton. Arthur was a good man. He had started as a caddy 20 years ago, and I had promoted him. He knew exactly who signed his paychecks. He knew exactly who owned the ground Richard Sterling was standing on. Arthur was pale. He was running so fast he almost tripped. He saw Richard holding my arm. He saw the security guards reaching for their batons. He looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Stop, he screamed. His voice cracked. Stop right now. Richard smiled smugly. Finally. Arthur, get this trash out of here. He stole a club and he is harassing my guests. I want him banned. I want him prosecuted. Arthur didn't even look at Richard. He ran straight to me. He pushed past the security guards. He bowed his head. He was trembling. Mr. Bennett, he gasped. Sir, I am so sorry. I didn't know you were on the course today. Are you all right? Did he hurt you? The security guards froze. They lowered their batons. They looked at Arthur, then at me. They stepped back instinctively. Richard looked confused. He looked at Arthur. Mr. Bennett, why are you calling him that? He is a mechanic, Arthur. He is a nobody. Why are you apologizing to him? He stole that club. Arthur turned to Richard. His face was red with fury. He straightened his tie. He summoned every ounce of authority he had. Mr. Sterling, release Mr. Bennett immediately. That club belongs to him. In fact, everything here belongs to him. Richard laughed nervously. He dropped my arm. What are you talking about? He cuts the grass, Arthur. Look at his shoes. Arthur signaled the security guards, but he didn't point at me. He pointed at Richard. Mr. Sterling, you have violated the code of conduct of the Royal Pines. You have physically assaulted our honorary chairman and the owner of this property. Richard blinked. Owner. Mr. Bennett founded this club 30 years ago. Arthur continued, his voice ringing across the silent green. He is the reason you are allowed to play here, or rather he was. Arthur turned to the head of security. Escort Mr. Sterling off the premises. Revoke his membership effective immediately. Cut his card. Empty his locker. And notify the gate that if his vehicle attempts to enter the property again, they are to call the police. Richard stepped back. No, you can't do that. I am a platinum member. I have guests. He pointed to the 3 investors who were watching the scene with horror. These men are here to do business with me. You are embarrassing me. I stepped forward. I brushed the dirt off my sleeve where Richard had grabbed me. They are not going to do business with you, Richard, I said. I looked at the investors. I nodded once. Gentlemen, I suggest you check the credit rating of Sterling Development before you sign anything. The man can't even pay his club fees. The lead investor, a man named Davidson, looked at Richard. He looked at the security guards moving in. He closed his portfolio. I think we have seen enough, he said. We will pass on the opportunity, Richard. Good luck. They turned and walked away toward the parking lot, leaving Richard alone on the grass. Richard's face turned purple. You did this, he screamed at me. You told them lies. You tricked Arthur. How much did you pay him to pretend you are important? Security. Arthur barked. Remove him, now. The guards grabbed Richard. One took his left arm, the other took his right. They didn't care about his suit. They didn't care about his dignity. They dragged him. Get your hands off me, Richard yelled, kicking his legs. Do you know who I am? I am Richard Sterling. This man is a fraud. He is a gardener. He is a nobody. They dragged him past the patio. The other members, the lawyers and doctors and senators, watched in silence. They sipped their iced tea and watched a man lose his social standing in real time. They saw him being hauled away like a drunk at a dive bar. Richard dug his heels into the turf, tearing up the grass. He was still shouting at me. "You are just lucky, Langston. You won a lottery or something. You are still trash. You hear me? You are trash in a country club." I watched him go. I stood on the 18th green, the wind blowing through the trees I had planted 3 decades ago. Arthur stood beside me, still shaking. "I am so sorry, sir," Arthur said. "I will have the grass repaired immediately." "It is fine, Arthur," I said. I looked at the gate where Richard was being thrown out onto the asphalt. He was dusting off his jacket, screaming at the closed iron bars. He still didn't get it. He couldn't process the reality. In his mind, I was still the poor old man. He thought I had bribed the staff. He thought it was a trick. He couldn't fathom that the power he worshipped belonged to the man he despised. That is his weakness, I thought. He only sees the costume. He never sees the man. I handed the titanium driver to Arthur. "Put this back in my locker," I said. "I think I am done playing for today." "Yes, sir. Can I get you anything else?" I looked at the investors driving away in their luxury sedans. I knew exactly where they were going. They were going back to their offices to kill the deal with Sterling Development. Richard had just lost his last lifeline. "Get me my phone, Arthur," I said. "I need to make a call. We have a house to buy." Richard was going to need cash fast, and I knew exactly which asset he would try to liquidate next. His prized mansion, the symbol of his status. And I was going to be the only buyer in the market. The Sterling mansion was a monument to debt. It stood on the highest hill in the city, a white colonial beast with 12 bedrooms and a garage full of leased cars. For 20 years, Richard Sterling had used this house as his primary collateral. He borrowed against the equity to fund his business. He borrowed against the business to pay the mortgage. It was a shell game played with bricks and mortar. But the game was over. The bank had sent a notice of default. They gave him 48 hours to pay the arrears, or they would foreclose. Richard didn't have the money. He didn't even have the money to pay the gardener. I sat in my office at Bennett Global, watching the digital feed from the county clerk's office. I had set an alert for the Sterling address. At 9 in the morning, the listing went live. Richard had panicked. He listed the house for $3 million. It was a fire sale price for a property worth $5 million. He needed cash immediately to stop the bank from seizing the deed and exposing his insolvency to the world. If the bank took the house, it would be public record. Everyone would know Richard Sterling was broke. He would rather sell his soul than let the country club know he was poor. I called Thorne. He was ready. "Make the offer," I said. "How much?" Sir Thorne asked. $1.5 million. Cash. Close by 5 p.m. today. Thorne paused. "That is insulting, sir. That is less than the land value. He will never take it." "He will take it," I said, "because the alternative is being homeless by Friday." And Thorne, tell him the buyer is willing to include a leaseback option. He can stay in the house as a tenant. I hung up. I watched the screen. I imagined Richard sitting in his study staring at the phone. He was drinking scotch. He was sweating. He was praying for a miracle. He thought he was a titan of industry, but he was just a gambler who had run out of chips. The phone rang at Thorne's desk. It was Richard's real estate agent. He was sputtering. He was offended. He said the offer was predatory. Thorne didn't argue. He just gave him a deadline. "Take it or leave it. You have 1 hour." 59 minutes later, the notification flashed on my screen. Offer accepted. Richard Sterling had sold his legacy for pennies on the dollar. He had saved his pride, but he had lost his kingdom. He signed the papers electronically. He didn't read the fine print on the lease agreement. If he had, he would have seen the clause about the rent. $15,000 a month due on the 1st. Late fees were punitive. Eviction proceedings would start after 3 days of non-payment. He thought he had bought himself time. He thought he had outsmarted the bank. He didn't know he had just handed the keys to his castle to the man he called trash. I owned the roof over his head. I owned the bed he slept in. I owned the ground he walked on. I swiveled my chair to look out the window. I could see the hill where his house stood. It looked small from up here. I picked up the phone again. "Thorne, send the welcome packet," I said. "Make sure the rent invoice is on top. And include a fruit basket, cheap fruit, the kind that rots in a day." The next phase of the trap was psychological. I wanted them to feel the walls closing in. I wanted them to know that their safety was an illusion. But while I was tightening the noose around Richard's neck, his daughter was busy spinning a new web. Victoria was walking down Fifth Avenue. She had just come from a pawn shop where she had sold her favorite diamond earrings. They offered her a fraction of what they were worth, but she needed cash for a manicure and a facial. She couldn't let herself go. Appearances were everything. She walked with her head high, ignoring the eviction notices piling up at her parents' house. She told herself this was temporary. She told herself she was a victim. She stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. A car pulled up to the curb next to her. It wasn't just a car, it was a silver Bentley Flying Spur. The paint looked like liquid mercury. The windows were tinted dark. It was the kind of car that turned heads. It was the kind of car Victoria dreamed of riding in. The back window rolled down. Victoria leaned in, hoping to catch the eye of a rich bachelor. She put on her best smile. But it wasn't a stranger in the back seat. The back seat was empty. The driver leaned across the passenger seat to look at the side mirror. It was Darius. He was wearing a tailored navy suit. He had a fresh haircut. He looked sharp. He looked powerful. He looked nothing like the broken man she had dumped a week ago. He was checking his watch, tapping the steering wheel of a $250,000 vehicle. Victoria froze. Her brain tried to process the image. Darius was broke. Darius was fired. Darius was a loser. But here he was driving a Bentley in the middle of the day, wearing a suit that cost more than her wedding dress. The light changed. Darius accelerated. The Bentley purred and glided away, disappearing into the traffic. Victoria stood on the corner, her mouth open. Her mind started racing. She started calculating. Maybe he wasn't broke. Maybe he had found a new job, a better job, or maybe his father wasn't as poor as he looked. She remembered the truck. But she also remembered the way I had stood up to her father. Greed is a powerful drug. It rewrites memory. It justifies everything. In that moment, Victoria forgot about the fake pregnancy. She forgot about the restraining order she had threatened. She forgot about the insults. All she saw was the car. All she saw was the money. She pulled out her phone. She looked at the blocked number list. She found Darius's name. She unblocked it. She started typing. "Hey stranger," she wrote. "I saw you today. You look good. I have been thinking about us. Maybe we were too hasty. I miss you. Can we talk?" She hit send. She stared at the screen, waiting for the 3 little dots to appear. She waited for the fish to bite. She thought she was casting a line. She didn't realize she was the one on the hook. I was sitting in the office with Darius when his phone buzzed. He looked at it. He frowned. He showed me the screen. "She saw the car," he said. "It is a company car, Dad. I was just taking it to the site meeting. I read the message. It was exactly what I expected. She was predictable. She was a heat-seeking missile for wealth." "Don't reply," I said. Darius looked at the phone. He looked tempted. Not because he loved her, but because he wanted answers. He wanted to know why she was so cruel. "Dad, if I talk to her, maybe I can get her to admit the baby isn't mine. Maybe I can record her." I took the phone from his hand. "No," I said. "Silence is louder than words, Darius. Let her wonder. Let her panic. If you reply, she knows she still has a hold on you. If you ignore her, she will go crazy trying to figure out what you have that she doesn't." I placed the phone face down on the desk. "Besides," I said, "we have a meeting with the Sterling development team in an hour. You are going to be sitting across the table from her father. You need to be focused. You are the director. You are the man who holds his fate in your hands. Do not let his daughter distract you." Darius nodded. He straightened his tie. He looked at the blueprints of the Zenith project. "You are right," he said. "Let her wait." He picked up his tablet. "Let's go buy a skyscraper, Dad." I smiled. "That is my son." Victoria sent 3 more texts that afternoon. Then she called. Then she left a voicemail crying about how hard her life was. She was unraveling. She was realizing that the door she slammed shut might have been the door to the vault. And she was desperate to pry it open again. She didn't know that the only thing waiting for her on the other side was a paternity test and a court order. Her campaign to win him back had begun. But it was a campaign against a fortress that had already raised the drawbridge. The night Victoria arrived on my doorstep, she looked like a fallen angel who had been dragged through the mud. It was 3 days after she had seen Darius in the Bentley. 3 days of silence from my son had driven her to desperation. She stood on my porch, shivering in the cold, wearing a thin coat and carrying a small suitcase. Her makeup was minimal, her hair was tied back in a messy bun. She was playing the role of the refugee. I opened the door. Darius stood behind me, his face impassive. "Mr. Bennett," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Darius, please, let me in. I have nowhere else to go." She looked at us with wide, teary eyes. "My parents lost the house," she sobbed. "They are staying in a motel by the airport. It is awful. My father is drinking again. My mother screams all day. I couldn't stay there. I was scared for the baby." She placed a hand on her stomach. "The baby card again. I ran away," she continued. "I couldn't be part of their lies anymore. They forced me to say those things about you, Darius. They threatened to kick me out if I didn't help them sue you. But I love you. I have always loved you. I chose you over them. Please help me." It was a compelling story. If I didn't know better, I might have felt pity. But I knew she had sold her earrings to pay for a facial just 2 days ago. I knew she had been texting her personal trainer asking if he had a spare room. She was here because we were her last option, not her first choice. I looked at Darius. He nodded slightly. It was the signal we had agreed upon. "Let her in," I said, stepping aside. "But understand this, Victoria. This is not a hotel. This is a poor man's house. You work for your keep here." Victoria rushed inside, thanking me profusely. "Oh, thank you, Langston. I will do anything. I just want to be safe. I just want our family to be together." She hugged Darius. He stood stiffly, his arms at his sides. He didn't hug her back. She pulled away, looking hurt, but quickly covered it with a brave smile. "I will make it up to you," she promised. "I will prove my loyalty." We gave her the spare room. It was small, dusty, and filled with boxes of old car parts. The bed was a cot with a thin mattress. There was no heating vent in that room. It was freezing. Victoria looked at the room and I saw her lip curl in disgust. But she caught herself. "It is perfect," she lied. "Thank you." The next morning, the re-education began. I woke her up at 5 a.m. I banged on her door with a wooden spoon. "Wake up," I shouted. "Breakfast doesn't make itself." She stumbled out of the room wearing silk pajamas that cost more than my truck. She looked exhausted. "What is it?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. I pointed to the kitchen. "Darius and I have to go to work. We need breakfast. You need eggs, toast, and coffee. And then you need to clean the bathroom. It hasn't been scrubbed in a month." Victoria stared at me. Me. Clean the bathroom. But I am pregnant. I shouldn't be inhaling chemicals. Use vinegar and baking soda, I said. It is natural, and it is cheap. Get to work. She gritted her teeth. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw something. But she remembered the Bentley. She remembered the suit Darius wore. She thought if she played the part of the dutiful wife, she would get the prize at the end. She made the eggs. She burned them. We ate them anyway without complaint. She scrubbed the bathroom. I watched her on the hidden camera I had installed. She cursed the whole time, calling me a dirty old peasant under her breath. She kicked the toilet. She spat in the sink. But when I walked past the door, she smiled and asked if I needed anything else. For 3 days, we made her life a living hell. We turned off the heat to save money. We ate canned beans and Spam for dinner. I made her wash my greasy work overalls by hand in the sink because I said the washing machine was broken. She did it all. She suffered through the cold, the bad food, and the manual labor. She was determined to secure her future. She was waiting for the moment Darius would take her back and whisk her away to his secret luxury life. But the cracks were starting to show. Her patience was wearing thin. She was hungry, she was cold, and she was starting to wonder if the Bentley was just a rental after all. On the 4th day, I set the trap. I left a bank book on the kitchen counter. It was an old, worn passbook from a local credit union. It looked official. It looked private. I left it right next to the sugar bowl where I knew she would find it when she made her morning tea. I went out to the garage to work on the truck. Darius was in the basement monitoring the cameras. I watched on my phone. Victoria walked into the kitchen. She looked around to make sure she was alone. She saw the bank book. Her eyes lit up. She snatched it off the counter. She opened it with trembling hands. She was expecting to see millions. She was expecting to see the secret fortune that paid for the Rolls-Royce. She flipped to the last page. She read the balance, $50.12. She froze. She reread it. She flipped back a few pages. Deposits of $200, withdrawals of $190. It was the account of a man living hand to mouth. She threw the book across the room. It hit the wall with a thud. "No," she screamed. "No, no, no. This can't be right." She started tearing through the drawers. She ripped open the cabinets. She was looking for the real money. She was looking for gold bars, cash deeds, anything. She found nothing but old receipts and coupons for discount soup. She was screaming now, animalistic shrieks of rage. She grabbed a vase from the shelf, a cheap ceramic thing I bought at a yard sale, and smashed it on the floor. "You lied to me," she yelled at the empty room. "You tricked me. You are broke. You are all broke." She kicked the kitchen chair over. She swept the canned food off the counter. She was destroying my kitchen in a tantrum of pure greed. I heard the noise from the garage. I walked in slowly, wiping grease from my hands. Darius came up from the basement. He stood in the hallway watching her. "Victoria, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice calm. She spun around. Her face was red, her hair wild. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You fraud," she screamed. "I saw the bank book. $50. You have $50 to your name. Where is the money, Langston? Where is the Bentley? Where is the suit?" "It was a rental," I said, "for a job interview." Darius didn't get the job. Victoria looked at Darius. You loser! You useless, pathetic loser! I scrubbed your toilet. I ate your garbage food. I slept in that freezing box for nothing. She lunged at Darius, hitting his chest with her fists. "I hate you," she shrieked. "I hate your poverty. I hate your smell. I hate this house. I should have stayed with my parents. At least they have class. You are just trash. Dirty, lying trash." Darius caught her wrists. He held her away from him. He looked at her not with anger, but with pity. "You are done, Victoria," he said. "I am done," she laughed hysterically. "I was done the minute I walked into this dump. I am leaving, and I am taking the baby. I am going to find a real man, a rich man, and you will never see this child again." She pulled free and stormed toward the door. She grabbed her suitcase. "I hope you rot here," she spat. "I hope you starve." She slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. I looked at the mess in the kitchen. Broken ceramic, dented cans, the bank book lying open on the floor. Darius walked over and picked it up. He dusted it off. "She didn't look at the other book," he said. I smiled. "No, she didn't." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the other passbook, the one I kept on me at all times. It was from a private bank in Switzerland. I opened it to the last page. The balance was 8 figures long. "She never was much for details, son," I said. Darius looked at the door where his wife had just walked out of his life forever. "She showed us who she is, Dad," he said. "Yes, she did. And now the whole world is going to see it too." I pointed to the small red light blinking on the smoke detector in the kitchen. It wasn't a smoke detector. It was a 4K camera with audio. "We have everything we need," I said. "The assault, the destruction of property, the admission that she only came back for money, the threat to take the child. It is all recorded." Darius nodded. He looked relieved. The burden of loving her was finally gone, replaced by the clarity of the truth. "Send it to Thorne," he said. "Add it to the file." I pulled out my phone. "Done," I said. "Now let's clean up this mess. We have a court date to prepare for, and I want the kitchen to be spotless when we celebrate our victory." The process server who arrived at my door was not the usual bored courier. He was a man in a tactical vest accompanied by 2 private security guards. Richard Sterling wanted to make sure I knew this was an act of war. He handed me a box. It was heavy. Inside was a lawsuit thick enough to stop a bullet. $5 million. That was the number printed on the first page. They were suing Darius for emotional distress, breach of contract fraud, and loss of future earnings. They claimed my son had orchestrated a long con to infiltrate their family and steal their wealth. The irony was so thick I could taste it. They had hired Preston Vane. In this city, the name Vane was synonymous with destruction. He was known as the White Shark. He did not just win cases. He ate the opposition. He cost $1,500 an hour, and he required a $500,000 retainer up front. Richard Sterling must have liquidated his last remaining assets or borrowed from a loan shark to afford him. He was betting everything on this kill. He wanted to bankrupt us. He wanted to put Darius in jail for fraud. He wanted to see me begging on the street. I sat at my kitchen table reading the complaint. It was a work of fiction. It painted Victoria as a saint and Darius as a predator. It described me as a violent, unhinged derelict who had physically threatened Richard at the wedding. It was a lie from start to finish. Darius sat across from me. He was pale. He read the name on the legal filing and closed his eyes. "Preston Vane," he whispered. "We are dead, Dad. We need a legal team. We need the best firm in the city. Call Thorne. Tell him to hire everyone." I closed the folder. I took a sip of my coffee. "No," I said. "We are not hiring a team, and we are not calling Thorne." Darius looked at me as if I had lost my mind. "Dad, this is a $5 million lawsuit. If we lose, they can garnish my wages for the rest of my life. They can take everything. We cannot fight Preston Vane alone." I stood up and walked to the window. I looked at the old truck parked outside. "We are not fighting him alone," I said. "You are fighting him." Darius stood up. "Me. I am an architect, not a lawyer. I don't know the first thing about court procedures. Vane will eat me alive." "That is exactly the point," I said, turning to face him. "Richard expects us to show up with high-powered lawyers. He expects a dogfight. He wants to see me spend my money defending you. He wants to drain my resources. But if you walk in there alone, representing yourself, he will see weakness. He will see a lamb walking into the slaughterhouse." I walked over to Darius. Arrogance is a blinder son. When a man thinks he has already won, he stops looking at the ground in front of him. He stops checking for traps. Richard and Vane will be so focused on crushing you they won't notice the net closing around them. Darius looked terrified. "But Dad, what if I mess up? What if I say the wrong thing?" "You won't," I promised, "because you are not going to argue the law. You are just going to tell the truth, and when the moment is right, I will step in." The day of the hearing, the courthouse was packed. Richard had leaked the court date to the press. He wanted an audience for our execution. Camera crews lined the steps. Reporters shouted questions as we walked up. They asked Darius why he hit his pregnant wife. They asked me if I was a violent alcoholic. We said nothing. We just walked. I wore my old gray suit, the one from the wedding. Darius wore a simple, off-the-rack jacket. We looked like exactly what they said we were. Poor, desperate men. Inside the courtroom, the contrast was stark. On the plaintiff's side, Preston Vane sat surrounded by a team of 4 junior associates. They had laptops, stacks of leather-bound files, and expensive water bottles. Richard and Victoria sat behind them looking somber and victimized. Victoria dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue. Richard glared at me with pure hatred. On our side, there was just Darius and me. The table was empty except for a single notepad and a pen. The bailiff announced the arrival of the judge. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harriet Ross." I stood up. I kept my head down. Judge Ross walked in. She was a stern woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She took her seat. She looked at the plaintiff's table. She nodded at Vane. Then she looked at our table. Her gaze lingered on me for a fraction of a second. Judge Ross and I sat on the board of the City Children's Hospital together. I had anonymously donated the new oncology wing 3 years ago. She knew exactly who I was. But she also knew I valued my privacy. She didn't blink. She didn't smile. She just opened the file. "Mr. Bennett," she said, addressing Darius, "I see you have no legal counsel present. Do you require a continuance to find a lawyer?" "No, Your Honor," Darius said, his voice shaking slightly. "I will be representing myself." A ripple of laughter went through the courtroom. Richard Sterling smirked openly. Preston Vane leaned back in his chair and whispered something to his associate, who chuckled. They thought it was over before it began. "Very well," Judge Ross said. "Mr. Vane, you may proceed with your opening statement." Preston Vane stood up. He buttoned his $3,000 suit. He walked to the jury box. He moved like a predator. He didn't look at his notes. He didn't need them. He knew how to destroy people. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Vane began, his voice a deep baritone that commanded attention. "We are here today because of a tragedy. Not a death, but the murder of a young woman's dreams. Victoria Sterling gave her heart to the defendant. She gave him her trust. And in return, he gave her abuse, lies, and humiliation. He walked over to where I was sitting. He pointed a finger at me. And he did not act alone. He was coached. He was guided by this man. A man who has contributed nothing to society. A man who lives in squalor and resentment. Langston Bennett is a leech. He looks at people like the Sterlings, people who have built this city with their hard work and enterprise, and he sees only targets. He raised his son to be a con artist. He taught him to seduce, to infiltrate, and to destroy. I sat perfectly still. I looked straight ahead. Inside, I was cataloging every word, every insult. Vane was good. He was painting a picture of class warfare. He was telling the jury that we were the barbarians at the gate. Vane turned back to the jury. They claimed poverty to elicit sympathy while spending the Sterling family's money. They claimed love while plotting theft. And when their plan was discovered at the wedding, they reacted with violence. This lawsuit is not just about money. It is about justice. It is about sending a message that you cannot prey on the successful and get away with it. We are asking for $5 million, but frankly, no amount of money can repair the damage these two grifters have caused. He sat down. Richard patted him on the back. Victoria looked at the jury with big, sad eyes. The jury looked at us with disgust. Vane had done his job. He had dehumanized us. Judge Ross looked at Darius. Mr. Bennett, your opening statement. Darius stood up. He looked small next to Vane. He didn't walk to the jury box. He stood behind his table, gripping the edge. I don't have a speech prepared, Darius said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Mr. Vane uses big words. He talks about grifters and leeches, but I only have facts. I loved Victoria. I worked hard. I paid for everything I could. And when my father was insulted, I left. That is not fraud. That is dignity. He sat down. It was short. It was honest. But against Vane's theatrics, it felt weak. Richard laughed out loud. The trial proceeded. Vane called witness after witness. He called catering staff who claimed I was rude. He called friends of Victoria who swore she was afraid of Darius. He even called a psychologist who had never met me to testify that my behavior fit the profile of a sociopath. It was a bloodbath. By the afternoon recess, Darius looked defeated. Richard was beaming. He was already spending the settlement money in his head. When the court reconvened, Vane called his star witness. Richard Sterling. Richard walked to the stand. He swore on the Bible. He looked at the jury with the confidence of a man who owns the room. Mr. Sterling, Vane asked, can you tell the court about the financial damage the defendant caused? Richard sighed. It was devastating. My company, Sterling Development, was on the verge of closing the biggest deal in the city history, the Zenith Project. But because of the scandal caused by this wedding, because of the rumors Darius started, our reputation was tarnished. Investors pulled out. We lost millions. My company is bleeding because of these two men, he pointed at us. They are jealous. They are petty. And they ruined me because they couldn't be me. I looked at Judge Ross. She was taking notes. She looked up and met my eyes. I gave a nearly imperceptible nod. It was the signal. Judge Ross cleared her throat. Mr. Vane, she said, cutting Richard off. Before we continue, I have received a motion regarding new evidence submitted by the defense. Vane stood up. Objection, Your Honor. The discovery period is over. The defendant is pro se. He doesn't know the rules. We haven't seen any new evidence. This evidence is of a sensitive financial nature, Judge Ross said, and it pertains directly to the witness's testimony regarding his company's solvency. She looked at Richard. Mr. Sterling, you just testified under oath that your company is bleeding because of the defendants. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Richard said, looking confused. And you testified that you are the sole owner of Sterling Development? I am. Judge Ross picked up a document from her bench, a document that had been delivered by a courier 5 minutes ago. The court has received a filing from a holding company, LB Holdings. They claim to have a controlling interest in your debt, Mr. Sterling. In fact, they claim to own your company's assets entirely due to default. Richard turned pale. LB Holdings. I don't know who that is. That is a lie. It is not a lie, Judge Ross said. The documents are certified. In light of this information and the potential for perjury, I am pausing these proceedings. She banged her gavel. Court is in recess for 30 minutes. Mr. Bennett, Mr. Sterling, and counsel in my chambers. Now! Richard looked at Vane. Vane looked at me. For the first time, the shark looked confused. He looked at the old man in the cheap suit, and he realized he had missed something. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I looked at Darius. It is time, son, I said. We walked toward the judge's chambers. The trap had snapped shut, and Richard Sterling was about to find out who was really holding the leash. The recess ended, and the bailiff called the court to order. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. It was no longer a circus. It was a funeral. Richard Sterling sat at the plaintiff's table, wiping sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. He looked at Preston Vane for reassurance, but for the first time the white shark looked uneasy. Vane was whispering furiously to his associates, scanning the legal code on his tablet, trying to figure out what legal maneuver Judge Ross was pulling. They thought the judge was just being difficult. They thought they could object their way out of this. They were wrong. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. It was not a quiet entrance. It was an arrival. Thorne walked in. He was not wearing the nondescript suit of a corporate drone. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal three-piece suit that cost more than the average car. He carried a briefcase made of Italian leather. He walked with the stride of a man who knows he is the most dangerous person in the room. He did not look at Darius. He did not look at me. He walked straight to the center of the room and stood before the bench. "Who is this?" Vane barked, standing up. "Your Honor, I object to this interruption. This man is not counsel for the defense." Judge Ross looked over her glasses. "You are correct, Mr. Vane. He is not counsel for the defense. He is here representing an interested third party, a party with a priority claim on the plaintiff's assets." Thorne turned to face the room. He placed his briefcase on the evidence table. The click of the latches opening echoed in the silent room. "My name is Arthur Thorne," he announced, his voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "I am the Chief Legal Officer for LB Holdings. I am not here to defend Darius Bennett. I am here to enforce a lien." Richard laughed nervously. "A lien? What are you talking about? I don't owe LB Holdings anything. I don't even know who they are." Thorne pulled a stack of documents from his case. They were thick, bound in blue legal covers. He held them up. "You know who we are," Mr. Sterling, Thorne said. "We are the entity that purchased your construction loans 3 weeks ago. We are the entity that bought your equipment leases last Monday. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, we are the entity that exercised the default clause in your primary business line of credit." The courtroom began to murmur. Richard stood up, his face turning red. "That is impossible," he shouted. "My credit is fine. I have 30 days to cure any default." Thorne walked over to the plaintiff's table. He dropped the heavy stack of documents in front of Richard. It landed with a dull thud that sounded like a coffin closing. "You had 30 days, Thorne corrected. "But you missed a payment on your insurance liability bond. That triggered an immediate acceleration clause. We called the debt, Mr. Sterling. All of it. $40 million. Richard looked at the papers. His hands were shaking so hard he couldn't turn the pages. He looked at Vane. "Do something," he hissed. "Fix this." Vane picked up the contract. He read the first page. His face went pale. He looked at Thorne. He looked at the judge. He sat down slowly. "It is ironclad," Vane whispered. "They own it all, Richard. They own the company." The reality hit Richard Sterling like a physical blow. He staggered back. He grabbed the edge of the table to support himself. "No," he gasped. "No. This is a mistake. I am Richard Sterling. I am a pillar of this community. You can't just come in here and take my company." Thorne ignored him. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor," Thorne said, "since the plaintiff, Mr. Sterling, is currently bankrupt and his assets have been seized by my client, he lacks the standing to fund this lawsuit. Furthermore, the funds he used to pay Mr. Vane's retainer were drawn from a frozen account. Technically, that money belongs to LB Holdings." Vane looked up sharply. He realized he wasn't going to get paid. He started packing his bag immediately. Richard looked around the room. He saw the reporters typing furiously on their laptops. He saw the jury looking at him not with admiration, but with pity. He saw his empire crumbling into dust in real time. "Who is doing this?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Who is LB Holdings? Who is trying to destroy me?" Thorne smiled. It was a cold, professional smile. "My client is a private investor," Thorne said. "A man who values detailed craftsmanship and prompt payment, a man you know very well." Richard looked confused. "I don't know any investors like that. Who is he? Tell me his name." Thorne turned and looked at the defense table. He looked directly at me. "Mr. Bennett," Thorne said, "would you like to introduce yourself to your employee?" I stood up. I didn't stand up like the old man with the bad back. I didn't hunch my shoulders. I stood up to my full height of 6 feet 2 inches. I unbuttoned the cheap gray jacket I had worn to the wedding. I took it off and draped it over the back of the chair. Underneath, I was wearing a black dress shirt rolled to the elbows, revealing the Rolex Daytona on my wrist. It was the only piece of jewelry I allowed myself to wear today. I walked out from behind the defense table. I didn't walk with a shuffle. I walked with the heavy, measured tread of a man who has walked through fire and come out carrying the torch. The courtroom went silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing. I walked to the center of the room. I stood next to Thorne. I looked at Richard. He was staring at me, his eyes wide, his mouth open. He looked at my watch. He looked at my posture. He looked at the cold, hard intelligence in my eyes that I had hidden for years. "You," Richard whispered, "you are the mechanic. You are the trash." I took a step closer. "I am the bank, Richard," I said. My voice was deep and resonant, filling the room without effort. "LB Holdings stands for Langston Bennett." Richard shook his head. "No, that is impossible. You live in a shack. You drive a rust bucket. You are poor." I laughed. It was a low, dark sound. I lived in a shack because I didn't need a mansion to know who I was. I drove a truck because it got the job done. I let you believe I was poor because I wanted to see if you were a man or a parasite. I pointed to the stack of documents on his table. "You failed the test, Richard. You mocked my son. You tried to destroy his life because you thought we were weak. You thought money made you a god. But you don't have money, Richard. You have debt. And I bought it all." I turned to the jury. They were mesmerized. "This man," I said, pointing at Richard, "is not a victim. He is a fraud. His company has been insolvent for 2 years. He used this lawsuit to try and extort money from my son to cover his losses. He lied to you. He lied to his investors. And he lied to himself." Richard lunged at me. "You stole it," he screamed. "You stole my life." He didn't get far. 2 bailiffs stepped in front of him. Richard collapsed against the table, sobbing. It was an ugly sound, the sound of a man who realizes he is naked in front of the world. Preston Vane stood up. He picked up his briefcase. "Your Honor," Vane said, "in light of these developments, I must withdraw as counsel. My client clearly cannot fulfill his financial obligations." He walked out, leaving Richard alone. I looked at Victoria. She was sitting in the gallery, her face a mask of shock. She looked at me. She looked at Darius. She realized she had walked away from a dynasty to chase pennies. I turned back to Richard. "You called me trash," I said softly, so only he could hear. I leaned in close. "Now I am the man who decides if you sleep in a bed or on a park bench tonight." I turned to the judge. "Your Honor," I said, "as the owner of Sterling Development, I am moving to dismiss this lawsuit with prejudice. My company does not sue its own directors." Judge Ross smiled. It was the first time she had smiled all day. "Motion granted, Mr. Bennett." Case dismissed. She banged the gavel. The sound rang out like a church bell. It was over. The lie was dead. And the truth was standing in the center of the room wearing a black shirt and a Rolex. The gavel had banged, but the echoes of the verdict had barely faded when a shrill scream pierced the silence of the courtroom. Richard Sterling was slumped over the table, a broken man, but his daughter was not ready to accept defeat. Victoria stood up from the gallery bench. Her face was flushed, her eyes wild with a mixture of terror and calculation. She saw the exit signs, but she also saw the man in the black shirt who had just revealed himself to be a billionaire. She saw the life she had dreamed of slipping through her fingers like sand. She looked at Darius, who was standing tall and free. She looked at me, the man she had called trash. And she decided to play the only card she had left, the card she thought was an ace. "Wait!" she shrieked, rushing toward the railing that separated the public seating from the court floor. "You cannot leave. You cannot walk away from this." She grabbed the wooden rail, her knuckles turning white. She pointed a trembling finger at Darius. "What about the baby, Darius? What about your son?" The courtroom froze. The reporters who were packing up their gear stopped. They turned their cameras back on. This was the drama they craved. Victoria saw the lenses focus on her, and she committed fully to the performance. She placed both hands on her stomach, cradling it protectively. She forced tears into her eyes. "You can destroy my father," she sobbed, her voice cracking perfectly. "You can steal his company. You can humiliate us. But you cannot abandon your own flesh and blood. This is your child. This is Langston's grandson. Are you going to let an innocent baby suffer because of your vendetta? Are you going to let your own bloodline starve in the street while you sit in your ivory tower counting your millions?" She looked at me pleadingly. "Langston, please. I know you hate me. I know I made mistakes. But look at me. I am carrying the future of the Bennett family. You are a grandfather. You have a duty. You have a moral obligation to support this child. I need medical care. I need a house. I need security. You have so much. Surely you can spare a few million for the safety of your heir." It was a powerful speech. I could see some of the jurors who had lingered shifting uncomfortably. It played on the most basic human instinct, the protection of children. She was banking on my pride. She was banking on Darius's soft heart. She thought that even if we hated her, we would never risk hurting a Bennett. She was right about one thing. I would never let a Bennett suffer. But she was wrong about the most important detail. I looked at Thorne. He was standing by the evidence table, his hand hovering over his laptop. He raised an eyebrow at me, a silent question. "Is it time?" I nodded once. Thorne cleared his throat. The sound was amplified by the courtroom microphone cutting through Victoria's sobs. "Your Honor." Thorne said, his voice calm and deadly. "Before the court adjourns, there is one final piece of evidence that must be entered into the record. It pertains directly to Ms. Sterling's claims of paternity and her demand for financial support." Victoria stopped crying. She looked at Thorne. A flicker of doubt crossed her face. What evidence, she demanded. "There is no evidence. It is his baby." Thorne didn't answer her. He tapped a key on his laptop. The large projection screen mounted on the wall behind the judge's bench flickered to life. It was usually used for displaying diagrams of traffic accidents or contract disputes. Today it was displaying the end of Victoria Sterling's life as she knew it. The first image that appeared was a document. It was blown up to massive proportions so every person in the room could read the fine print. It was a DNA paternity test report. The header showed the logo of the most reputable genetic lab in the state. The name of the alleged father was Darius Bennett. The name of the mother was Victoria Sterling. The sample source was listed as a hair follicle legally obtained from the residence of the alleged grandfather. The courtroom was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Everyone's eyes were glued to the bottom of the document where the results were highlighted in bold red letters. "Probability of paternity 0%. A collective gasp swept through the room. Victoria stared at the screen. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like she had been slapped by a ghost. "That is a lie," she whispered. "That is fake. You forged it." Thorne tapped the key again. The image on the screen changed. It was no longer a document. It was a photograph, a high-resolution surveillance photo taken with a telephoto lens. It showed Victoria standing outside a gym. She was wearing workout clothes. She was not alone. She was wrapped in the arms of a man who was definitely not Darius. He was tall, muscular, and wearing a shirt that said personal trainer. They were kissing. It was not a friendly kiss. It was passionate. It was intimate. Thorne tapped the key again. Another photo. The same man and Victoria walking into a hotel. The timestamp in the corner of the photo was dated 3 months ago. The exact week Darius was in the hospital, sitting by my bedside while I recovered from a minor surgery, I had kept quiet. "The dates do not lie," Ms. Sterling Thorne said, his voice ringing out. "At the time of conception, Darius Bennett was nowhere near you. He was caring for his father. You, however, were caring for Mr. Chad Miller, your fitness instructor." The courtroom erupted. The reporters were shouting questions. The flashbulbs were blinding. Victoria stood at the railing exposed. Her lie was stripped away layer by layer until there was nothing left but the ugly truth. She looked at the photos. She looked at the trainer's face beaming down at her from the screen. She couldn't deny it. The evidence was overwhelming. She turned to Darius. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with panic. She reached out her hand over the rail trying to grab him, trying to find purchase on the cliff edge she was falling from. "Darius, please," she begged. "It doesn't matter. We can make it work. I can explain. It was a mistake. I was lonely. You were always working. You were always with your dad. I needed comfort." Darius looked at her hand. He didn't take it. He stepped closer to the rail, not to comfort her, but to say goodbye. He looked at her face, the face he had once thought was the most beautiful thing in the world. Now he saw only a stranger. He saw a mask that had slipped. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. He didn't look like a victim anymore. He looked like a CEO. "I don't hate you," Victoria Darius said. His voice was soft, but it carried through the silent room. Victoria stopped crying. She looked at him with a glimmer of hope. "You don't," she whispered. "No," Darius shook his head. "Hate takes energy. Hate implies that you still have power over me, and you don't." He looked up at the screen at the photos of her betrayal. "I pity you," he said. "You had everything. You had a man who loved you. You had a family that would have embraced you. If you had been honest about your parents' struggles, my father would have helped them. If you had been loyal, we would have given you the world. He looked back at her. But you traded a dynasty for a gym membership, Victoria. You traded a legacy for a quick thrill and a lie. You are going to wake up tomorrow and you are going to realize that you sold a diamond to buy a piece of glass. Darius turned his back on her. He walked over to where I was standing. He stood beside me, shoulder to shoulder. "Goodbye, Victoria," he said without looking back. Victoria stood there for a moment, her hands still reaching out, grasping at empty air. The reality crashed down on her. The money was gone. The reputation was gone. The baby leverage was gone. She looked at her father, who was still weeping at the table. She looked at the judge, who was looking at her with stern disapproval. She let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob. It was the sound of a structure collapsing. Her legs gave out. She slid down the railing and crumbled onto the floor of the courtroom. She curled into a ball, covering her face with her hands, trying to hide from the cameras, trying to hide from the truth. But there was nowhere to hide. The screen above her still showed the DNA results glowing like a neon sign of her failure. I put my hand on Darius's shoulder. "Let's go, son," I said. "We have work to do." We walked out of the courtroom, leaving the Sterlings in the ruins of their own making. We walked past the cameras, past the questions, past the noise. We walked out into the sunlight, which seemed brighter than it had been in months. Darius took a deep breath of fresh air. He adjusted his cuffs. He checked his watch. "Dad," he said. "Yes, son. We are going to be late for the board meeting." I smiled. "Then we better take the jet." The eviction notice had expired at midnight, but I gave them until noon. I wanted the sun to be high in the sky, so there would be no shadows for them to hide in. I pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the mansion I now owned. I was not in the Rolls-Royce today. I was in my old blue truck. It felt appropriate. It was the vehicle they had sneered at, and it was the vehicle that would witness their final exit. Behind me was a convoy of 3 sheriff department cruisers and a black van carrying Thorne and his legal team. The gates were open. As we drove up the winding driveway, I saw a large unmarked box truck parked on the lawn, ruining the landscaping. Men were hauling furniture out of the front door. They were moving fast, too fast for professional movers. They were looting. I parked the truck and stepped out. The sheriff, a man I had known for 20 years, stepped out of his cruiser. He adjusted his belt and walked toward the chaos. "Stop right there," the sheriff shouted. The movers froze, holding a Louis XIV armoire halfway down the stairs. Richard Sterling appeared in the doorway. He was wearing a tracksuit and looking frantic. He saw the police and his face twisted in panic. "What is this?" Richard yelled. "I am just moving my personal property. I have rights." Thorne stepped out of the black van. He held a clipboard. "Actually, Mr. Sterling, you do not," Thorne said, his voice cutting through the humid air. "According to the leaseback agreement you signed, all furnishings, fixtures, and art were included in the sale to LB Holdings. You are currently attempting to steal my client's property. That is grand larceny." Richard dropped the box he was holding. It burst open, spilling silverware onto the driveway. "But I bought these," he stammered. "They are mine." "You sold them," Thorne corrected. "You sold everything to pay your debts. The only things you are legally allowed to remove are clothing and personal toiletries. Everything else stays." I walked up the steps. I looked at the movers. "Put it back," I said. They looked at Richard, then at the sheriff. They didn't need to be told twice. They turned around and started carrying the furniture back inside. Catherine ran out of the house. She was holding a jewelry box. "You can't take my jewelry," she screamed, clutching the box to her chest. "These are family heirlooms." I looked at Thorne. Thorne checked the list. The jewelry was appraised and included in the asset liquidation to cover the outstanding balance of the fraudulent loan Mr. Sterling took out in your name, Mrs. Sterling. It belongs to the estate. Catherine looked at Richard with pure venom. "You said you paid that off," she hissed. "You told me the jewelry was safe." Richard ignored her. He looked at me. He saw the sheriff waiting with handcuffs. He saw the movers leaving. He saw the end of the road. The fight drained out of him. He didn't look like a titan of industry anymore. He looked like a frightened old man. He walked down the stairs slowly. His legs were shaking. He stopped 2 feet in front of me. And then he did the unthinkable. He dropped to his knees. He fell onto the gravel driveway, ruining his expensive tracksuit. He clasped his hands together like a man praying to a vengeful god. "Langston, please," he begged. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the sweat. "Don't do this. Don't throw us out on the street. We have nowhere to go. No money, no friends." I looked down at him. I remembered the way he had looked at me at the wedding, the way he had pointed his finger, the way he had called me trash. "Get up, Richard," I said. "You are embarrassing yourself." He didn't get up. He crawled forward, reaching for the hem of my work pants. "We are family, Langston," he sobbed. "Darius and Victoria were together for 3 years. We broke bread together. Doesn't that mean anything? I know I made mistakes. I was arrogant. I was stressed. But surely you have mercy in your heart. We are old men, Langston. We should be helping each other." "Family," I repeated. I looked at the house. I looked at the luxury cars being towed away by the repo men I had called. "You tried to frame my son for abuse," I said. "You tried to bankrupt him. You called me garbage in front of 500 people. That is not family, Richard. That is war, and you lost." Catherine stepped forward. She didn't kneel, but she looked desperate. She pointed a shaking finger at her husband. "It is his fault," she screamed. She looked at me, her eyes wide and wild. "Langston, listen to me. I didn't want to do any of it. Richard forced me. He gambled away our money. He made the bad deals. He told Victoria to lie about the baby. I told him it was wrong. I told him we shouldn't mess with Darius." "You liar," Richard shouted from the ground. "You were the one who wanted the country club membership. You were the one who needed the new house. You drove me to this." They started screaming at each other right there on the driveway. They were tearing each other apart, blaming, cursing, revealing every ugly secret they had kept hidden. It was pathetic. It was the end of a dynasty that had been built on sand. "Enough," I shouted. My voice boomed across the lawn, silencing them both. "I don't care whose fault it is. I don't care about your excuses. You are both rot. You are both poison, and you are both leaving." Richard grabbed my leg. "Just give us a month," he pleaded, "or give us a small loan. Just enough to get an apartment. $10,000. That is nothing to you. Please, Langston. You are a billionaire. You won't even miss it." I pulled my leg away. I stepped back. I looked at Thorne. "Is the representative here?" I asked. Thorne nodded. He signaled to a car that had just pulled up. A woman in a modest suit got out. She looked kind but serious. Richard looked at her confused. "Who is that? Is that a social worker?" I turned to Richard and Catherine. "You want to know what I'm going to do with this house?" I asked. Richard looked hopeful. "Are you going to let us stay?" "No," I said. I pointed to the woman. "This is the director of the City Youth Outreach Program. I am donating this property to them effective immediately." Richard gasped. "You are giving away my house." "It is my house," I corrected. "And yes, I am." I looked at the massive white columns. I looked at the sprawling lawn. "This place has been a monument to greed for too long," I said. "Starting tomorrow, it will be a school and a shelter for underprivileged children. Children who have nothing. Children who need a chance. It will be a place where character is taught, not bought." Catherine started to wail. "But what about us? What about our shelter?" I looked at them. I looked at their designer clothes and their soft hands. "You have your health," I said. "You have your freedom, because I decided not to press criminal charges today, though I should. That is more than most people have." I pointed to the gate. "The shelter is for children who need help," I said. "You two need a reality check." Richard stood up. He dusted off his knees. His face hardened. The begging was over. The hatred returned. "You are a cruel man, Langston Bennett," he spat. "You enjoy this." "I enjoy justice," I said. I turned to the sheriff. "Sheriff, remove these trespassers from my property. If they try to take anything other than the clothes on their backs, arrest them." The sheriff stepped forward. "Let's go, folks," he said. "The show is over." Richard and Catherine Sterling walked down the driveway. They didn't have a car. The repo trucks had already taken them. They walked. They carried no bags because they had tried to steal the silver instead of packing their clothes. They walked toward the main road where the bus stop was. They walked out of the world of the rich and into the world they had spent their lives mocking. I watched them go until they were just specks in the distance. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Darius. He had arrived in his own car just in time to see the end. He stood beside me watching his former in-laws disappear. "Do you feel bad, Dad?" he asked quietly. I took a deep breath of the fresh air. The air didn't smell like greed anymore. It smelled like rain and soil. "No, son," I said. I looked at the woman from the charity who was looking up at the house with tears in her eyes, imagining all the good she could do. "I feel like I finally took out the trash." 1 year later, the Zenith Tower pierced the skyline of the city. It was a monolith of glass and steel, a testament to modern engineering and the centerpiece of the new downtown district. I stood in the back of the crowd during the ribbon-cutting ceremony. I wore my favorite work jacket and my old boots. Nobody looked at me. All eyes were on the man standing at the podium. Darius Bennett, the CEO of the newly formed Bennett Development Group, looked out at the sea of reporters and investors. He didn't look terrified anymore. He didn't look like a man who needed approval. He looked like a king in his own kingdom. He spoke with authority, outlining the future of the company and the sustainable housing projects we were launching in the inner city. He didn't mention the Sterlings. He didn't mention the scandal. He had moved past them. He had climbed so high they were no longer visible from where he stood. Standing next to him was Maya, his wife. She wasn't a socialite. She wasn't a model. She was the program director at the youth shelter I had donated the Sterling mansion to. They had met during the transition when Darius was personally overseeing the renovations to turn the ballroom into a cafeteria. They had married 3 months ago in my backyard. There were no 500 guests. There were no crystal chandeliers. There was just family, friends, and a barbecue grill. Darius wore a suit, but he took off his tie to play football with the kids from the shelter. Maya wore a simple white dress and looked at my son with eyes that saw the man, not the bank account. When I gave a toast, I didn't talk about money. I talked about character. I talked about how fire refines gold. Darius had been through the fire, and he had come out pure. He was happy. Not the frantic, desperate happiness of someone trying to please a predator, but the quiet, solid happiness of a man who knows his worth. As the applause died down, Darius looked into the crowd. He found me. He didn't point. He didn't make a scene. He just nodded. It was a silent communication between father and son. Acknowledgement that we had won. Acknowledgement that the empire was safe. While Darius was building the future, the past had finally caught up with the Sterlings. Justice is not always swift, but when you have the best lawyers in the country, it is inevitable. Thorne had not stopped with the civil lawsuits. During the acquisition of Sterling Development, his forensic accountants had found irregularities, massive ones. Richard had been cooking the books for a decade. He had been defrauding investors, embezzling construction funds, and laundering money to pay for his lavish lifestyle. The trial was short. Richard tried to blame his accountants. He tried to blame the economy. He even tried to blame Catherine. But the paper trail was undeniable. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud and tax evasion. I saw the photo of him entering the correctional facility. He wasn't wearing an Italian suit. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit. His head was shaved. He looked small. He looked like exactly what he was, a crook who got caught. Catherine moved to a small apartment in a neighboring state to be closer to the prison, but mostly to hide from her former friends. She spent her days posting angry rants on social media about conspiracies and injustice until her internet was cut off for non-payment. She was alone, bitter, and forgotten. And then there was Victoria. I decided to take a drive last week. I took the truck out to the interstate to a truck stop diner about 20 miles out of town. I sat in a booth in the corner and ordered coffee. The waitress who brought it to me looked familiar but also like a stranger. Her blonde hair was dull, showing dark roots. Her face was lined with exhaustion and there were dark circles under her eyes. Her hands, the hands that used to hold champagne flutes, were chapped and red from scrubbing tables. Victoria put the cup down. She spilled a little in the saucer. She sighed loudly, annoyed at her own clumsiness. She wiped it up with a dirty rag. She looked at me. For a second, our eyes locked. I waited for the recognition. I waited for the scream or the begging. But there was nothing. Her eyes were dead. She looked right through me. To her, I was just another old man in a work shirt ordering cheap coffee. I was just another customer she had to serve to make rent. She had spent her life judging people by their appearance, and now that blindness was her prison. She didn't know she was serving the billionaire she had tried to rob. She just knew her feet hurt. I left a $100 tip on the table, not out of kindness, but as a final reminder that I could afford to be generous and she could not afford to be proud. I drove back to my house as the sun began to set. I parked the truck next to the porch. The gravel crunched under the tires, a sound I loved more than any symphony. I walked up the steps and sat in my old rocking chair. The wood creaked. It was a familiar, comforting sound. People ask me why I don't move. They ask why I don't buy a penthouse in the city or a villa in France. They say a billionaire shouldn't live in a shack. They don't understand. This isn't a shack. This is my home. This is where I raised a good man. This is where I planned a war and won it without firing a shot. I looked out over the yard. I could see the fireflies starting to dance in the twilight. I thought about Richard Sterling in his cell. I thought about Victoria in her diner. They had chased the illusion of wealth and lost their souls. They thought money was a costume you wore to convince the world you were important. I picked up my mug. It was chipped on the rim. The coffee was instant bought in a bulk jar for $5. It was hot and strong. Money is a tool, I thought. It is a hammer. You can use it to build a shelter or you can use it to break a window. The Sterlings used it to break people. I used it to fix my family. I took a sip. It tasted better than the $1,000 champagne at the wedding. It tasted like victory. It tasted like integrity. I am Langston Bennett. I am a billionaire. I am a father. And I am sitting on my own porch drinking my own coffee paid for with honest work. That is the only luxury that matters. I watched the stars come out one by one. The world was quiet. My son was safe. My conscience was clear. And the coffee tasted like freedom. In the end, this battle was never about money. It was about worth. The Sterlings had millions in the bank, yet they were spiritually bankrupt. I drove a beat-up truck, yet I possessed the richest things on earth: loyalty, dignity, and a son who finally learned to stand tall. True power isn't found in shouting at waiters or flashing gold cards. It is the quiet confidence of knowing exactly who you are when the world isn't watching. Never let anyone measure your value by your wallet. A tailored suit can hide a monster and a stained work shirt can hold a king. Build your character first and the empire will follow. If you believe that integrity is the ultimate currency, hit that like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone who only saw the surface? I want to hear your victory.